sacramental meal, during which the neophyte ate out of a drum and drank from a cymbal. After being baptized by the blood of a bull, the new initiate was fed entirely on milk to symbolize that he was still a philosophical infant, having but recently been born out of the sphere of materiality. See Fraser's The Golden Bough. Is there a possible connection between this lacteal diet prescribed by the Attic rite and St. Paul's allusion to the food for spiritual babes? Sallust gives a key to the esoteric interpretation of the Attic rituals. Cybele, the Great Mother, signifies the vivifying powers of the universe, and Attis, that aspect of the spiritual intellect which is suspended between the divine and animal spheres. The mother of the gods, loving Attis, gave him a starry hat, signifying celestial powers. But Attis, or mankind, falling in love with a nymph, symbolic of the lower animal propensities, forfeited his divinity and lost his creative powers. It is thus evident that Attis represents the human consciousness, and that his mysteries are concerned with the reattainment of the starry hat. See Sallust on the gods and the world. The rites of Sabazius were very similar to those of Bacchus, and it is generally believed that the two deities are identical. Bacchus was born at Sabazius, or Sabaoth, and these names are frequently assigned to him. The Sabazian mysteries were performed at night, and the ritual included the drawing of a live snake across the breast of the candidate. Clement of Alexandria writes, "The token of the Sabazian mysteries to the initiated is the deity gliding over the breast." A golden serpent was the symbol of Sabazius because this deity represented the annual renovation of the world by the solar power. The Jews borrowed the name Sabaoth from these mysteries and adopted it as one of the appellations of their supreme god. During the time the Sabazian mysteries were celebrated in Rome, the cult gained many votaries and later influenced the symbolism of Christianity. The Kabiric mysteries of Samothrace were renowned among the ancients, being next to the Eleusinian in public esteem. Herodotus declares that the Samothracians received their doctrines, especially those concerning Mercury, from the Pelasgians. Little is known concerning the Kabiric rituals, for they were enshrouded in the profoundest secrecy. Some regard the Kabiri as 7 in number, and refer to them as the 7 spirits of fire before the throne of Saturn. Others believe the Kabiri to be the 7 sacred wanderers, later called the planets. While a vast number of deities are associated with the Samothracian mysteries, the ritualistic drama centers around 4 brothers. The first 3, Askieros, Achiokersus, and Achiokersa, attack and murder the 4th, Kashmala, or Kedmilis. Dionysiodorus, however, identifies Askieros with Demeter, Achiokersus with Pluto, Achiokersa with Persephone, and Kashmala with Hermes. Alexander Wilder notes that in the Samothracian ritual, Kedmilis is made to include the Theban serpent god, Cadmus, the Thoth of Egypt, the Hermes of the Greeks, and the Emeph, or Aesculapius of the Alexandrians and Phoenicians. Here again is a repetition of the story of Osiris, Bacchus, Adonis, Balder, and Hiram Abiff. The worship of Attis and Cybele was also involved in the Samothracian mysteries. In the rituals of the Kabiri is to be traced a form of pine tree worship, for this tree, sacred to Attis, was first trimmed into the form of a cross and then cut down in honor of the murdered god, whose body was discovered at its foot. "If you wish to inspect the orgies of the Corybantes," writes Clement, "then know that, having killed their 3rd brother, they covered the head of the dead body with a purple cloth, crowned it, and carrying it on the point of a spear, buried it under the roots of Olympus. These mysteries are, in short, murders and funerals. This ante-Nicene father, in his efforts to defame the pagan rites, apparently ignores the fact that, like the Kabirian martyr, Jesus Christ was foully betrayed, tortured, and finally murdered. And the priests of these rites, who are called kings of the sacred rites by those whose business it is to name them, give additional strangeness to the tragic occurrence, by forbidding parsley with the roots from being placed on the table, for they think that parsley grew from the Corybantic blood that flowed forth, just as the women, in celebrating the Thesmorphia, abstain from eating the seeds of the pomegranate, which have fallen on the ground, from the idea that pomegranates sprang from the drops of the blood of Dionysus. Those Corybantes also they call Kabiric, and the ceremony itself they announce as the Kabiric mystery. The mysteries of the Kabiri were divided into 3 degrees, the first of which celebrated the death of Kashmala at the hands of his 3 brothers. The second, the discovery of his mutilated body, the parts of which had been found and gathered after much labor. And the third, accompanied by great rejoicing and happiness, his resurrection and the consequent salvation of the world. The temple of the Kabiri at Samothrace contained a number of curious divinities, many of them misshapen creatures representing the elemental powers of nature, possibly the Bacchic Titans. Children were initiated into the Kabirian cult with the same dignity as adults, and criminals who reached the sanctuary were safe from pursuit. The Samothracian rites were particularly concerned with navigation. The Dioscuri, Castor and Pollux, or the gods of navigation, being among those propitiated by members of that cult. The Argonautic expedition, listening to the advice of Orpheus, stopped at the island of Samothrace for the purpose of having its members initiated into the Kabiric rites. Herodotus relates that when Cambyses entered the temple of the Kabiri, he was unable to restrain his mirth at seeing before him the figure of a man standing upright, and facing the man, the figure of a woman standing on her head. Had Cambyses been acquainted with the principles of divine astronomy, he would have realized that he was then in the presence of the key to the universal equilibrium. I ask, says Voltaire, who were these hierophants, these sacred Freemasons, who celebrated their ancient mysteries of Samothracia, and whence came they and their gods Kabiri? See Mackey's Encyclopedia of Freemasonry. Clement speaks of the mysteries of the Kabiri as the sacred mystery of a brother slain by his brethren, and the Kabiric death was one of the secret symbols of antiquity. Thus the allegory of the self murdered by the not-self is perpetuated through the religious mysticism of all peoples. The philosophic death and the philosophic resurrection are the lesser and the greater mysteries respectively. A curious aspect of the dying god myth is that of the hanged man. The most important example of this peculiar conception is found in the Odinic rituals, where Odin hangs himself for 9 nights from the branches of the world tree, and upon the same occasion also pierces his own side with the sacred spear. As the result of this great sacrifice, Odin, while suspended over the depths of Niflheim, discovered by meditation the runes or alphabets by which later the records of his people were preserved. Because of this remarkable experience, Odin is sometimes shown seated on a gallows tree, and he became the patron deity of all who died by the noose. Esoterically, the hanged man is the human spirit which is suspended from heaven by a single thread. Wisdom, not death, is the reward for this voluntary sacrifice during which the human soul, suspended above the world of illusion and meditating upon its unreality, is rewarded by the achievement of self-realization. From a consideration of all these ancient and secret rituals, it becomes evident that the mystery of the dying god was universal among the illumined and venerated colleges of the sacred teaching. This mystery has been perpetuated in Christianity in the crucifixion and death of the God-man Jesus the Christ. The secret import of this world tragedy and the universal martyr must be rediscovered if Christianity is to reach the heights attained by the pagans in the days of their philosophic supremacy. The myth of the dying God is the key to both universal and individual redemption and regeneration, and those who do not comprehend the true nature of this supreme allegory are not privileged to consider themselves either wise or truly religious. The Life and Teachings of Thoth Hermes Trismegistus. Thunder rolled, lightning flashed. The veil of the temple was rent from top to bottom. The venerable initiator, in his robes of blue and gold, slowly raised his jeweled wand and pointed with it into the darkness revealed by the tearing of the silken curtain. Behold, the light of Egypt. The candidate, in his plain white robe, gazed into the utter blackness, framed by the two great lotus-headed columns between which the veil had hung. As he watched, a luminous haze distributed itself throughout the atmosphere until the air was a mass of shining particles. The face of the neophyte was illumined by the soft glow as he scanned the shimmering cloud for some tangible object. The initiator spoke again. "This light which ye behold is the secret luminance of the mysteries. Whence it comes, none knoweth, save the master of the light. Behold him." Suddenly, through the gleaming mist, a figure appeared, surrounded by a flickering greenish sheen. The initiator lowered his wand and, bowing his head, placed one hand edgewise against his breast in humble salutation. The neophyte stepped back in awe, partly blinded by the glory of the revealed figure. Gaining courage, the youth gazed again at the Divine One. The form before him was considerably larger than that of a mortal man. The body seemed partly transparent so that the heart and brain could be seen pulsating and radiant. As the candidate watched, the heart changed into an ibis, and the brain into a flashing emerald. In its hand, this mysterious being bore a winged rod entwined with serpents. The aged initiator, raising his wand, cried out in a loud voice, "All hail thee, Thoth Hermes, thrice greatest! All hail thee, Prince of Men! All hail thee who standeth upon the head of Typhon!" At the same instant, a lurid, writhing dragon appeared, a hideous monster, part serpent, part crocodile, and part hog. From its mouth and nostrils poured sheets of flame, and horrible sounds echoed through the vaulted chambers. Suddenly Hermes struck the advancing reptile with the serpent-wound staff, and with snarling cry the dragon fell over upon its side. While the flames about it slowly died away, Hermes placed his foot upon the skull of the vanquished Typhon. The next instant, with a blaze of unbearable glory that sent the neophyte staggering backward against a pillar, the immortal Hermes, followed by streamers of greenish mist, passed through the chamber and faded into nothingness. Suppositions concerning the identity of Hermes. Iamblichus averred that Hermes was the author of 20,000 books. Mantheo increased the number to more than 36,000. See James Gardner. Figures which make it evident that a solitary individual, even though he be overshadowed by divine prerogative, could scarcely have accomplished such a monumental labor. Among the arts and sciences which it is affirmed Hermes revealed to mankind were medicine, chemistry, law, astrology, music, rhetoric, magic, philosophy, geography, mathematics, especially geometry, anatomy, and oratory. Orpheus was similarly acclaimed by the Greeks. Hermes Mercurius Trismegistus. From Historia Deorum Fatidicorum. Master of all arts and sciences, perfect in all crafts, ruler of the three worlds, scribe of the gods and keeper of the books of life. Thoth Hermes Trismegistus, the 3 times greatest, the first intelligencer, was regarded by the ancient Egyptians as the embodiment of the universal mind. While in all probability there actually existed a great sage and educator by the name of Hermes, it is impossible to extricate the historical man from the mass of legendary accounts which attempt to identify him with the cosmic principle of thought. In his Biographia Antiqua, Francis Barrett says of Hermes, "If God ever appeared in man, he appeared in him, as is evident both from his books and his Pymander, in which works he has communicated the sum of the abyss, and the divine knowledge to all posterity, by which he has demonstrated himself to have been not only an inspired divine, but also a deep philosopher, obtaining his wisdom from God and heavenly things, and not from man." His transcendent learning caused Hermes to be identified with many of the early sages and prophets. In his ancient mythology, Bryant writes, "I have mentioned that Cadmus was the same as the Egyptian Thoth, and it is manifest from his being Hermes, and from the invention of the letters being attributed to him. In the chapter on the theory of Pythagorean mathematics will be found the table of the original Cadmean letters." Investigators believe that it was Hermes who was known to the Jews as Enoch, called by Kenealy the second messenger of God. Hermes was accepted into the mythology of the Greeks, later becoming the Mercury of the Latins. He was revered through the form of the planet Mercury because his body is nearest to the sun. Hermes of all creatures was nearest to God and became known as the messenger of the gods. In the Egyptian drawings of him, Thoth carries a waxen writing tablet and serves as the recorder during the weighing of the souls of the dead in the judgment hall of Osiris, a ritual of great significance. Hermes is of first importance to Masonic scholars because he was the author of the Masonic initiatory rituals, which were borrowed from the mysteries established by Hermes. Nearly all of the Masonic symbols are Hermetic in character. Pythagoras studied mathematics with the Egyptians and from them gained his knowledge of the symbolic geometric solids. Hermes is also revered for his reformation of the calendar system. He increased the year from 360 to 365 days, thus establishing a precedent which still prevails. The appellation, thrice greatest, was given to Hermes because he was considered the greatest of all philosophers, the greatest of all priests, and the greatest of all kings. It is worthy of note that the last poem of America's beloved poet, Henry Wadsworth Longfellow, was a lyric ode to Hermes. See Chambers' Encyclopedia. The mutilated Hermetic fragments. On the subject of the Hermetic books, James Campbell Brown in his History of Chemistry has written, "Leaving the Chaldean and earliest Egyptian periods, of which we have remains but no record, and from which no names of either chemists or philosophers have come down to us, we now approach the historic period, when books were written, not at first upon parchment or paper, but upon papyrus. A series of early Egyptian books is attributed to Hermes Trismegistus, who may have been a real savant, or may be a personification of a long succession of writers. He is identified by some with the Greek god Hermes and the Egyptian Thoth, or Tuti, who was the moon god, and is represented in ancient paintings as ibis-headed with the disk and crescent of the moon. The Egyptians regarded him as the god of wisdom, letters, and the recording of time. It is in consequence of the great respect entertained for Hermes by the old alchemists that chemical writings were called hermetic, and that the phrase hermetically sealed is still in use to designate the closing of a glass vessel by fusion, after the manner of chemical manipulators. We find the same root in the hermetic medicines of Paracelsus and the hermetic Freemasonry of the Middle Ages. Among the fragmentary writings believed to have come from the stylus of Hermes are two famous works. The first is the Emerald Table, and the second is the Divine Pymander, or as it is more commonly called, the Shepherd of Men, a discussion of which follows. One outstanding point in connection with Hermes is that he was one of the few philosopher-priests of pagandom upon whom the early Christians did not vent their spleen. Some church fathers went so far as to declare that Hermes exhibited many symptoms of intelligence, and that if he had only been born in a more enlightened age, so that he might have benefited by their instructions, he would have been a really great man. In his Stromata, Clement of Alexandria, one of the few chroniclers of pagan lore, whose writings have been preserved to this age, gives practically all the information that is known concerning the original 42 books of Hermes and the importance with which these books were regarded by both the temporal and spiritual powers of Egypt. Clement describes one of their ceremonial processions as follows. For the Egyptians pursue a philosophy of their own. This is principally shown by their sacred ceremonial. For first advances the singer, bearing some of the symbols of music, for they say that he must learn 2 of the books of Hermes, the one of which contains the hymns of the gods, the second, the regulations for the king's life. After the singer advances, the astrologer, with a horologe in his hand, and a palm, the symbols of astrology. He must have the astrological books of Hermes, which are 4 in number, always in his mouth. Of these, one is about the order of the fixed stars that are visible, and another about the conjunctions and luminous appearances of the sun and moon, and the rest respecting their risings. Next in order advances the sacred scribe, with wings on his head, and in his hand a book and rule, in which were writing ink and the reed, with which they write. and he must be acquainted with what are called hieroglyphics, and know about cosmography and geography, the position of the sun and moon, and about the 5 planets. Also, the description of Egypt and the chart of the Nile, and the description of the equipment of the priests and of the place consecrated to them, and about the measures and the things in use in the sacred rites. Then the stole keeper follows those previously mentioned with the cubit of justice and the cup for libations. He is acquainted with all points called pediutic, relating to training, and mashafaltic, or sacrificial. There are also 10 books which relate to the honor paid by them to their gods, and containing the Egyptian worship, as that relating to sacrifices, first fruits, hymns, prayers, processions, festivals, and the like. And behind all walks the prophet, with the water vase carried openly in his arms, who is followed by those who carry the issues of loaves. He, as being the governor of the temple, learns the 10 books called hieratic, and they contain all about the laws and the gods and the whole of the training of the priests. For the prophet is, among the Egyptians, also over the distribution of the revenues. There are then 42 books of Hermes indispensably necessary, of which the 36 containing the whole philosophy of the Egyptians are learned by the forementioned personages, and the other 6, which are medical, by the pastophoroi, or image-bearers, treating of the structure of the body and of disease, and instruments, and medicines, and about the eyes, and the last about women. One of the greatest tragedies of the philosophic world was the loss of nearly all of the 42 books of Hermes mentioned in the foregoing. These books disappeared during the burning of Alexandria, for the Romans, and later the Christians, realized that until these books were eliminated, they could never bring the Egyptians into subjection. The volumes which escaped the fire were buried in the desert, and their location is now known to only a few initiates of the secret schools. The Book of Thoth. While Hermes still walked the earth with men, he entrusted to his chosen successors the sacred Book of Thoth. This work contained the secret processes by which the regeneration of humanity was to be accomplished, and also served as the key to his other writings. Nothing definite is known concerning the contents of the Book of Thoth, other than its pages were covered with strange hieroglyphic figures and symbols, which gave to those acquainted with their use unlimited power over the spirits of the air and the subterranean divinities. When certain areas of the brain are stimulated by the secret processes of the mysteries, the consciousness of man is extended, and he is permitted to behold the immortals and enter into the presence of the superior gods. The Book of Thoth described the method whereby this stimulation was accomplished. In truth, therefore, it was the key to immortality. According to legend, the Book of Thoth was kept in a golden box in the inner sanctuary of the temple, but there was but one key, and this was in the possession of the Master of the Mysteries, the highest initiate of the Hermetic Arcanum. He alone knew what was written in the secret book. The Book of Thoth was lost to the ancient world with the decay of the mysteries, but its faithful initiates carried it sealed in the sacred casket into another land. The book is still in existence and continues to lead the disciples of this age into the presence of the immortals. No other information can be given to the world concerning it now, but the apostolic succession from the first Hierophant initiated by Hermes himself remains unbroken to this day, and those who are peculiarly fitted to serve the immortals may discover the priceless document if they will search sincerely and tirelessly for it. It has been asserted that the Book of Thoth is, in reality, the mysterious tarot of the Bohemians, a strange emblematic book of 78 leaves, which has been in possession of the gypsies since the time when they were driven from their ancient temple, the Serapeum. According to the secret histories, the gypsies were originally Egyptian priests. There are now in the world several secret schools privileged to initiate candidates into the mysteries, but in nearly every instance they lighted their altar fires from the flaming torch of Hermes, in his Book of Thoth, revealed to all mankind the one way, and for ages the wise of every nation and every faith have reached immortality by the way established by Hermes in the midst of the darkness for the redemption of humankind. Thoth, the Ibis-headed. From Wilkinson's Manners and Customs of the Ancient Egyptians. It is doubtful that the deity called Thoth by the Egyptians was originally Hermes, but the two personalities were blended together, and it is now impossible to separate them. Thoth was called the Lord of the Divine Books and Scribe of the Company of the Gods. He is generally depicted with the body of a man and the head of an ibis. The exact symbolic meaning of this latter bird has never been discovered. A careful analysis of the peculiar shape of the ibis, especially its head and beak, should prove illuminating. Poimander, the Vision of Hermes. The divine Poimander of Hermes Mercurius Trismegistus is one of the earliest of the Hermetic writings now extant. While probably not in its original form, having been remodeled during the first centuries of the Christian era and incorrectly translated since, this work undoubtedly contains many of the original concepts of the Hermetic cultus. The divine Poimander consists of 17 fragmentary writings gathered together and put forth as one work. The second book of the divine Poimander, called Poimander, or The Vision, is believed to describe the method by which the divine wisdom was first revealed to Hermes. It was after Hermes had received this revelation that he began his ministry, teaching to all who would listen the secrets of the invisible universe as they had been unfolded to him. The Vision is the most famous of all the Hermetic fragments and contains an exposition of Hermetic cosmogony and the secret sciences of the Egyptians regarding the culture and unfoldment of the human soul. For some time it was erroneously called the Genesis of Enoch, but that mistake has now been rectified. At hand, while preparing the following interpretation of the symbolic philosophy contained within the Vision of Hermes, the present author has had these reference works. The Divine Poimander of Hermes Mercurius Trismegistus, London, 1650, translated out of the Arabic and Greek by Dr. Everard. Hermetica, Oxford, 1924, edited by Walter Scott. Hermes, The Mysteries of Egypt, Philadelphia, 1925, by Edward Shure, and The Thrice Greatest Hermes, London, 1906, by G.R.S. Mead. To the material contained in the above volumes he has added commentaries based upon the esoteric philosophy of the ancient Egyptians, together with amplifications derived partly from other Hermetic fragments and partly from the secret arcanum of the Hermetic sciences. For the sake of clarity, the narrative form has been chosen in preference to the original dialogic style, and obsolete words have given place to those in current use. Hermes, while wandering in a rocky and desolate place, gave himself over to meditation and prayer. Following the secret instructions of the temple, he gradually freed his higher consciousness from the bondage of his bodily senses, and thus released his divine nature, revealed to him the mysteries of the transcendental spheres. He beheld a figure, terrible and awe-inspiring. It was the great dragon, with its wings stretching across the sky and light streaming in all directions from its body. The mysteries taught that the universal life was personified as a dragon. The great dragon called Hermes by name, and asked him why he thus meditated upon the world mystery. Terrified by the spectacle, Hermes prostrated himself before the dragon, beseeching it to reveal its identity. The great creature answered that it was Poimander, the mind of the universe, the creative intelligence, and the absolute emperor of all. Shure identifies Poimander as the god Osiris. Hermes then besought Poimander to disclose the nature of the universe and the constitution of the gods. The dragon acquiesced, bidding Trismegistus hold its image in his mind. Immediately the form of Poimander changed. Where it had stood, there was a glorious and pulsating radiance. This light was the spiritual nature of the great dragon itself. Hermes was raised into the midst of this divine effulgence, and the universe of material things faded from his consciousness. Presently a great darkness descended, and, expanding, swallowed up the light. Everything was troubled. About Hermes swirled a mysterious watery substance which gave forth a smoke-like vapor. The air was filled with inarticulate moanings and sighings, which seemed to come from the light swallowed up in the darkness. His mind told Hermes that the light was the form of the spiritual universe, and that the swirling darkness which had engulfed it represented material substance. Then, out of the imprisoned light, a mysterious and holy word came forth and took its stand upon the smoking waters. This word, the voice of the light, rose out of the darkness as a great pillar, and the fire and the air followed after it. But the earth and the water remained unmoved below. Thus the waters of light were divided from the waters of darkness, and from the waters of light were formed the worlds above, and from the waters of darkness were formed the worlds below. The earth and the water next mingled, becoming inseparable, and the spiritual world, which is called reason, moved upon their surface, causing endless turmoil. Then again was heard the voice of Poimander, but his form was not revealed. I, thy God, am the light and the mind, which were before substance was divided from spirit, and darkness from light. And the word which appeared as a pillar of flame out of the darkness is the Son of God, born of the mystery of the mind. The name of that word is reason. Reason is the offspring of thought, and reason shall divide the light from the darkness, and establish truth in the midst of the waters. Understand, O Hermes, and meditate deeply upon the mystery. That which in you sees and hears is not of the earth, but is the word of God incarnate. So it is said that divine light dwells in the midst of mortal darkness, and ignorance cannot divide them. The union of the word and the mind produces that mystery which is called life. As the darkness without you is divided against itself, so the darkness within you is likewise divided. The light and the fire which rise are the divine man, ascending in the path of the word, and that which fails to ascend is the mortal man, which may not partake of immortality. Learn deeply of the mind and its mystery, for therein lies the secret of immortality. The dragon again revealed its form to Hermes, and for a long time the two looked steadfastly, one upon the other, eye to eye, so that Hermes trembled before the gaze of Poimander. At the word of the dragon the heavens opened, and the innumerable light powers were revealed, soaring through the cosmos on pinions of streaming fire. Hermes beheld the spirits of the stars, the celestials controlling the universe, and all those powers which shine with the radiance of the one fire, the glory of the sovereign mind. Hermes realized that the sight which he beheld was revealed to him only because Poimander had spoken a word. The word was reason, and by the reason of the word invisible things were made manifest. Divine mind, the dragon, continued its discourse. Before the visible universe was formed, its mold was cast. This mold was called the archetype, and this archetype was in the supreme mind long before the process of creation began. Beholding the archetypes, the supreme mind became enamored with its own thought. So, taking the word as a mighty hammer, it gouged out caverns in primordial space and cast the form of the spheres in the archetypal mold, at the same time sowing in the newly fashioned bodies the seeds of living things. The darkness below, receiving the hammer of the word, was fashioned into an orderly universe. The elements separated into strata, and each brought forth living creatures. The Supreme Being, the mind, male and female, brought forth the word, and the word, suspended between light and darkness, was delivered of another mind called the workman, the master builder, or the maker of things. In this manner it was accomplished, O Hermes. The word, moving like a breath through space, called forth the fire by the friction of its motion. Therefore the fire is called the Son of Striving. The workman passed as a whirlwind through the universe, causing these substances to vibrate and glow with its friction. The Son of Striving thus formed 7 governors, the spirits of the planets whose orbits bounded the world, and the 7 governors controlled the world by the mysterious power called destiny, given them by the fiery workman. When the second mind, the workman, had organized chaos, the word of God rose straightway out of its prison of substance, leaving the elements without reason, and joined itself to the nature of the fiery workman. Then the second mind, together with the risen word, established itself in the midst of the universe, and whirled the wheels of the celestial powers. This shall continue from an infinite beginning to an infinite end, for the beginning and the ending are in the same place and state. Then the downward turned and unreasoning elements brought forth creatures without reason. Substance could not bestow reason, for reason had ascended out of it. The air produced flying things, and the waters such as swim. The earth conceived strange four-footed and creeping beasts, dragons, composite demons, and grotesque monsters. Then the Father, the Supreme Mind, being light and life, fashioned a glorious, universal man in its own image, not an earthly man, but a heavenly man dwelling in the light of God. The Supreme Mind loved the man it had fashioned and delivered to him the control of the creations and workmanships. The man, desiring to labor, took up his abode in the sphere of generation and observed the works of his brother, the second mind, which sat upon the ring of the fire, and having beheld the achievements of the fiery workman, he willed also to make things, and his father gave permission. The 7 governors, of whose powers he partook, rejoiced, and each gave the man a share of its own nature. The man longed to pierce the circumference of the circles, and understand the mystery of him who sat upon the eternal fire. Having already all power, he stooped down and peeped through the 7 harmonies, and, breaking through the strength of the circles, made himself manifest to nature stretched out below. The man, looking into the depths, smiled, for he beheld a shadow upon the earth, and a likeness mirrored in the waters, which shadow and likeness were a reflection of himself. The man fell in love with his own shadow and desired to descend into it. Coincident with the desire, the intelligent thing united itself with the unreasoning image or shape. Nature, beholding the descent, wrapped herself about the man whom she loved, and the two were mingled. For this reason, earthy man is composite. Within him is the sky man, immortal and beautiful. Without is nature, mortal and destructible. Thus suffering is the result of the immortal man's falling in love with his shadow and giving up reality to dwell in the darkness of illusion. For, being immortal, man has the power of the 7 governors, also the life, the light, and the word. But being immortal, he is controlled by the rings of the governors, fate or destiny. Of the immortal man it should be said that he is hermaphrodite, or male and female, and eternally watchful. He neither slumbers nor sleeps, and is governed by a father also both male and female, and ever watchful. Such is the mystery kept hidden to this day, for nature, being mingled in marriage with the sky man, brought forth a wonder most wonderful. 7 men, all bisexual, male and female, and upright of stature, each one exemplifying the natures of the 7 governors. These, O Hermes, are the 7 races, species, and wheels. A Greek form of Hermes, from Bryant's mythology. The name Hermes is derived from Herm, a form of Hiram, the personified universal life principle, generally represented by fire. The Scandinavians worshipped Hermes under the name of Odin, the Teutons as Wotan, and certain of the Oriental peoples as Buddha or Fo. There are 2 theories concerning his demise. The first declares that Hermes was translated like Enoch and carried without death into the presence of God. The second states that he was buried in the valley of Ebron, and a great treasure placed in his tomb, not a treasure of gold, but of books and sacred learning. The Egyptians likened humanity to a flock of sheep. The supreme and inconceivable father was the shepherd, and Hermes was the shepherd dog. The origin of the shepherd's crook in religious symbolism may be traced to the Egyptian rituals. The 3 scepters of Egypt included the shepherd's crook, symbolizing that by virtue of the power reposing in that symbolic staff, the initiated pharaohs guided the destiny of their people. After this manner were the 7 men generated. Earth was the female element, and water the male element, and from the fire and the aether they received their spirits, and nature produced bodies after the species and shapes of men, and man received the life and light of the great dragon, and of the life was made his soul, and of the light his mind. And so all these composite creatures containing immortality, but partaking of mortality, continued in this state for the duration of a period. They reproduced themselves out of themselves, for each was male and female. But at the end of the period, the knot of destiny was untied by the will of God, and the bond of all things was loosened. Then all living creatures, including man, which had been hermaphroditical, were separated, the males being set apart by themselves, and the females likewise, according to the dictates of reason. Then God spoke to the holy word within the soul of all things, saying, Increase in increasing, and multiply in multitudes, all you, my creatures, and workmanships. Let him that is endowed with mind know himself to be immortal, and that the cause of death is the love of the body. And let him learn all things that are, for he who has recognized himself enters into the state of good. And when God has said this, Providence, with the aid of the 7 governors and harmony, brought the sexes together, making the mixtures and establishing the generations, and all things were multiplied according to their kind. He who through the error of attachment loves his body, abides wandering in darkness, sensible and suffering the things of death. But he who realizes that the body is but the tomb of his soul, rises to immortality. Then Hermes desired to know why men should be deprived of immortality for the sin of ignorance alone. The great dragon answered, To the ignorant the body is supreme, and they are incapable of realizing the immortality that is within them. Knowing only the body which is subject to death, they believe in death because they worship that substance which is the cause and reality of death. Then Hermes asked how the righteous and wise passed to God, which Poimander replied, That which the word of God said, say I, because the Father of all things consists of life and light, whereof man is made. If therefore a man shall learn and understand the nature of life and light, then he shall pass into the eternity of life and light. Hermes next inquired about the road by which the wise attained to life eternal, and Poimander continued, Let the man endowed with a mind mark, consider, and learn of himself, and with the power of his mind divide himself from his not-self, and become a servant of reality. Hermes asked if all men did not have minds, and the great dragon replied, Take heed what you say, for I am the mind, the eternal teacher. I am the Father of the Word, the Redeemer of all men, and in the nature of the wise the Word takes flesh. By means of the Word the world is saved. I, Thought, Thoth, Father of the Word, the mind, come only unto men that are holy and good, pure and merciful, and that live piously and religiously, and my presence is an inspiration and a help to them. For when I come, they immediately know all things and adore the universal Father. Before such wise and philosophic ones die, they learn to renounce their senses, knowing that these are the enemies of their immortal souls. I will not permit the evil senses to control the bodies of those who love me, nor will I allow evil emotions and evil thoughts to enter them. I become as a porter or doorkeeper, and shut out evil, protecting the wise from their own lower nature. But to the wicked, the envious, and the covetous, I come not, for such cannot understand the mysteries of mind. Therefore, I am unwelcome. I lead them to the avenging demon that they are making in their own souls. For evil each day increases itself and torments man more sharply, and each evil deed adds to the evil deeds that are gone before, until finally evil destroys itself. The punishment of desire is the agony of unfulfillment. Hermes bowed his head in thankfulness to the great dragon, who had taught him so much, and begged to hear more concerning the ultimate of the human soul. So Poimander resumed. At death, the material body of man is returned to the elements from which it came, and the invisible divine man ascends to the source from whence he came, namely, the 8th sphere. The evil passes to the dwelling place of the demon, and the senses, feelings, desires, and body passions return to their source, namely, the 7 governors, whose natures in the lower man destroy, but in the invisible spiritual man give life. After the lower nature has returned to the brutishness, the higher struggles again to regain its spiritual estate. It ascends the 7 rings upon which sit the 7 governors, and returns to each their lower powers in this manner. Upon the first ring sits the moon, and to it is returned the ability to increase and diminish. Upon the second ring sits Mercury, and to it are returned machinations, deceit, and craftiness. Upon the third ring sits Venus, and to it are returned the lusts and passions. Upon the fourth ring sits the Sun, and to this lord are returned ambitions. Upon the fifth ring sits Mars, and to it are returned rashness and profane boldness. Upon the 6th ring sits Jupiter, and to it are returned the sense of accumulation and riches. And upon the 7th ring sits Saturn, at the gate of chaos, and to it are returned falsehood and evil plotting. Then, being naked of all the accumulations of the 7 rings, the soul comes to the 8th sphere, namely the ring of the fixed stars. Here, freed of all illusion, it dwells in the light, and sings praises to the Father in a voice which only the pure of spirit may understand. Behold, O Hermes, there is a great mystery in the 8th sphere, for the Milky Way is the seed ground of souls, and from it they drop into the rings, and to the Milky Way they return again from the wheels of Saturn. But some cannot climb the 7-runged ladder of the rings, so they wander in darkness below and are swept into eternity with the illusion of sense and earthiness. The path to immortality is hard, and only a few find it. The rest await the great day when the wheels of the universe shall be stopped, and the immortal sparks shall escape from the sheaths of substance. Woe unto those who wait, for they must return again, unconscious and unknowing, to the seed ground of stars, and await a new beginning. Those who are saved by the light of the mystery which I have revealed unto you, O Hermes, and which I now bid you to establish among men, shall return again to the Father who dwelleth in the white light, and shall deliver themselves up to the light, and shall be absorbed into the light, and in the light they shall become powers in God. This is the way of good, and is revealed only to them that have wisdom. Blessed art thou, O Son of Light, to whom of all men I, Poimander, the light of the world, have revealed myself. I order you to go forth, to become as a guide to those who wander in darkness, that all men within whom dwells the spirit of my mind, the universal mind, may be saved by my mind in you, which shall call forth my mind in them. Establish my mysteries, and they shall not fail from the earth. For I am the mind of the mysteries, and until mind fails, which is never, my mysteries cannot fail. With these parting words, Poimander, radiant with celestial light, vanished, mingling with the powers of the heavens. Raising his eyes unto the heavens, Hermes blessed the Father of all things, and consecrated his life to the service of the great light. Thus preached Hermes: O people of the earth, men born and made of the elements, but with the spirit of the divine man within you, rise from your sleep of ignorance. Be sober and thoughtful. Realize that your home is not in the earth, but in the light. Why have you delivered yourselves over unto death, having power to partake of immortality? Repent and change your minds. Depart from the dark light and forsake corruption forever. Prepare yourselves to climb through the 7 rings and to blend your souls with the eternal light. Some who heard mocked and scoffed, and went their way, delivering themselves to the second death, from which there is no salvation. But others, casting themselves before the feet of Hermes, besought him to teach them the way of life. He lifted them gently, receiving no approbation for himself, and staff in hand, went forth teaching and guiding mankind, and showing them how they might be saved. In the worlds of men, Hermes sowed the seeds of wisdom and nourished the seeds with the immortal waters. And at last came the evening of his life, and as the brightness of the light of earth was beginning to go down, Hermes commanded his disciples to preserve his doctrines inviolate throughout all ages. The vision of Poimander he committed to writing, that all men desiring immortality might therein find the way. In concluding his exposition of the vision, Hermes wrote, "The sleep of the body is the sober watchfulness of the mind, and the shutting of my eyes reveals the true light. My silence is filled with budding life and hope, and is full of good. My words are the blossoms of fruit of the tree of my soul. For this is the faithful account of what I received from my true mind, that is Poimander, the great dragon, the Lord of the Word, through whom I became inspired by God with the truth. Since that day my mind has been ever with me, and in my own soul it hath given birth to the Word. The Word is reason, and reason hath redeemed me. For which cause, with all my soul and all my strength, I give praise and blessing unto God the Father, the life and the light, and the eternal good. Holy is God, the Father of all things, the one who is before the first beginning. Holy is God, whose will is performed and accomplished by his own powers, which he hath given birth to out of himself. Holy is God, who has determined that he shall be known, and who is known by his own to whom he reveals himself. Holy art thou, who by thy word, reason, hast established all things. Holy art thou, of whom all nature is the image. Holy art thou, whom the inferior nature has not formed. Holy art thou, who art stronger than all powers. Holy art thou, who art greater than all excellency. Holy art thou, who art better than all praise. Accept these reasonable sacrifices from a pure soul and a heart stretched out unto thee. O thou unspeakable, unutterable, to be praised with silence, I beseech thee to look mercifully upon me, that I may not err from the knowledge of thee, and that I may enlighten those that are in ignorance, my brothers and thy sons. Therefore I believe thee, and bear witness unto thee, and depart in peace, and in trustfulness, into thy light and life. Blessed art thou, O Father, the man thou hast fashioned would be sanctified with thee, as thou hast given him power to sanctify others with thy word and thy truth. The vision of Hermes, like nearly all of the Hermetic writings, is an allegorical exposition of great philosophic and mystic truths, and its hidden meaning may be comprehended only by those who have been raised into the presence of the true mind. The initiation of the pyramid. Supreme among the wonders of antiquity, unrivaled by the achievements of later architects and builders, the Great Pyramid of Giza bears mute witness to an unknown civilization, which, having completed its predestined span, passed into oblivion. Eloquent in its silence, inspiring in its majesty, divine in its simplicity, the Great Pyramid is indeed a sermon in stone. Its magnitude overwhelms the puny sensibilities of man. Among the shifting sands of time, it stands as a fitting emblem of eternity itself. Who were the illumined mathematicians who planned its parts and dimensions, the master craftsmen who supervised its construction, the skilled artisans who trued its blocks of stone? The earliest and best-known account of the building of the Great Pyramid is that given by the highly revered but somewhat imaginative historian Herodotus. The pyramid was built in steps, battlement-wise, as it is called, or, according to others, altar-wise. After laying the stones for the base, they raised the remaining stones to their places by means of machines formed of short wooden planks. The first machine raised them from the ground to the top of the first step. On this there was another machine which received the stone upon its arrival and conveyed it to the second step, once the third machine advanced it still higher. Either they had as many machines as there were steps in the pyramid, or possibly they had but a single machine, which, being easily moved, was transferred from tier to tier as the stone rose. Both accounts are given, and therefore I mention both. The upper portion of the pyramid was finished first, then the middle, and finally the part which was lowest and nearest the ground. There is an inscription in Egyptian characters on the pyramid which records the quantity of radishes, onions, and garlic consumed by the laborers who constructed it, and I perfectly well remember that the interpreter who read the writing to me said that the money expended in this way was 1,600 talents of silver. If this then is a true record, what a vast sum must have been spent on the iron tools used in the work, and on the feeding and clothing of the laborers, considering the length of time the work lasted, which has already been stated, 10 years, and the additional time, no small space I imagine, which must have been occupied by the quarrying of stones, their conveyance, and the formation of the underground apartments. While his account is extremely colorful, it is apparent that the father of history, for reasons which he doubtless considered sufficient, concocted a fraudulent story to conceal the true origin and purpose of the Great Pyramid. This is but one of several instances in his writings which would lead the thoughtful reader to suspect that Herodotus himself was an initiate of the sacred schools, and consequently obligated to preserve inviolate the secrets of the ancient orders. The theory advanced by Herodotus, and now generally accepted, that the pyramid was the tomb of the pharaoh Cheops, cannot be substantiated. In fact, Manetho, Eratosthenes, and Diodorus Siculus all differ from Herodotus, as well as from each other, regarding the name of the builder of this supreme edifice. The sepulchral vault, which, according to the Lepsius law of pyramid construction, should have been finished at the same time as the monument, or sooner, was never completed. There is no proof that the building was erected by the Egyptians, for the elaborate carvings with which the burial chambers of Egyptian royalty are almost invariably ornamented are entirely lacking, and it embodies none of the elements of their architecture or decoration, such as inscriptions, images, cartouches, paintings, and other distinctive features associated with dynastic mortuary art. The only hieroglyphics to be found within the pyramid are a few builders' marks sealed up in the chambers of construction, first opened by Howard Weiss. These apparently were painted upon the stones before they were set in position, for in a number of instances the marks were either inverted or disfigured by the operation of fitting the block. Such indignities, as the most eminent authorities on the subject are still uncertain as to the true meaning of these crude markings. Whatever proof they might be that the building was erected during the Fourth Dynasty is certainly offset by the seashells at the base of the pyramid, which Mr. Gabb advances as evidence that it was erected before the deluge, a theory substantiated by the much abused Arabian traditions. One Arabian historian declared that the pyramid was built by the Egyptian sages as a refuge against the flood, while another proclaimed it to have been the treasure house of the powerful antediluvian king Shaddad-ben-Dad. A panel of hieroglyphics over the entrance, which the casual observer might consider to afford a solution of the mystery, unfortunately dates back no further than A.D. 1843, having been cut at that time by Dr. Lepsius as a tribute to the King of Prussia. Caliph al-Ma'mun, an illustrious descendant of the Prophet, inspired by stories of the immense treasures sealed within its depths, journeyed from Baghdad to Cairo, A.D. 820, with a great force of workmen to open the mighty pyramid. When Caliph al-Ma'mun first reached the foot of the Rock of Ages and gazed up at its smooth, glistening surface, a tumult of emotions undoubtedly racked his soul. The casing stones must have been in place at the time of his visit, for the Caliph could find no indication of an entrance. 4 perfectly smooth surfaces confronted him. Following vague rumors, he set his followers to work on the north side of the pyramid, with instructions to keep on cutting and chiseling until they discovered something. To the Muslims, with their crude instruments and vinegar, it was a Herculean effort to tunnel a full 100 feet through the limestone. Many times they were on the point of rebellion, but the word of the Caliph was law, and the hope of a vast fortune buoyed them up. At last, on the eve of total discouragement, fate came to their rescue. A great stone was heard to fall somewhere in the wall near the toiling and disgruntled Arabs. Pushing on toward the sound with renewed enthusiasm, they finally broke into the descending passage which leads into the subterranean chamber. They then chiseled their way around the great stone portcullis, which had fallen into a position barring their progress, and attacked and removed one after another the granite plugs, which for a while continued to slide down the passage leading from the Queen's chamber above. Finally, no more blocks descended, and the way was clear for the workers of the Prophet. But where were the treasures? From room to room the frantic workmen rushed, looking in vain for loot. The discontent of the Muslims reached such a height that Caliph al-Ma'mun, who had inherited much of the wisdom of his illustrious father, the Caliph al-Rashid, sent to Baghdad for funds, which he caused to be secretly buried near the entrance of the pyramid. He then ordered his men to dig at that spot, and great was their rejoicing when the treasure was discovered, the workmen being deeply impressed by the wisdom of the antediluvian monarch who had carefully estimated their wages and thoughtfully caused the exact amount to be buried for their benefit. The Caliph then returned to the city of his fathers, and the Great Pyramid was left to the mercy of succeeding generations. In the 9th century, the sun's rays, striking the highly polished surfaces of the original casing stones, caused each side of the pyramid to appear as a dazzling triangle of light. Since that time, all but 2 of these casing stones have disappeared. Investigation has resulted in their discovery, recut and resurfaced, in the walls of Mohammedan mosques and palaces, in various parts of Cairo and its environs. Pyramid problems. C. Piazzi Smith asks, was the Great Pyramid, then, erected before the invention of hieroglyphics and previous to the birth of the Egyptian religion? Time may yet prove that the upper chambers of the pyramid were a sealed mystery before the establishment of the Egyptian Empire. In the subterranean chamber, however, are markings which indicate that the Romans gained admission there. In the light of the secret philosophy of the Egyptian initiates, W. W. Harman, by a series of extremely complicated yet exact mathematical calculations, determines that the first ceremonial of the pyramid was performed 68,890 years ago, on the occasion when the star Vega for the first time sent its rays down the descending passage into the pit. The actual building of the pyramid was accomplished in the period of from 10 to 15 years immediately preceding this date. While such figures doubtless will evoke the ridicule of modern Egyptologists, they are based upon an exhaustive study of the principles of sidereal mechanics as incorporated into the structure of the pyramid by its initiated builders. If the casing stones were in position at the beginning of the 9th century, the so-called erosion marks upon the outside were not due to water. The theory also that the salt upon the interior stones of the pyramid is evidence that the building was once submerged is weakened by the scientific fact that this kind of stone is subject to exudations of salt. While the building may have been submerged, at least in part, during the many thousands of years since its erection, the evidence adduced to prove this point is not conclusive. The Great Pyramid was built of limestone and granite throughout, the two kinds of rock being combined in a peculiar and significant manner. The stones were trued with the utmost precision, and the cement used was of such remarkable quality that it is now practically as hard as the stone itself. The limestone blocks were sawed with bronze saws, the teeth of which were diamonds or other jewels. The chips from the stones were piled against the north side of the plateau on which the structure stands, where they form an additional buttress to aid in supporting the weight of the structure. The entire pyramid is an example of perfect orientation and actually squares the circle. This last is accomplished by dropping a vertical line from the apex of the pyramid to its baseline. If this vertical line be considered as the radius of an imaginary circle, the length of the circumference of such a circle will be found to equal the sum of the base lines of the four sides of the pyramid. A vertical section of the Great Pyramid, from Smith's Life and Work at the Great Pyramid. The Great Pyramid stands upon a limestone plateau at the base of which, according to ancient history, the Nile once flooded, thus supplying a method for the huge blocks used in its construction. Presuming that the capstone as originally in place, the pyramid is, according to John Taylor, in round figures, 486 feet high. The base of each side is 764 feet long, and the entire structure covers a ground area of more than 13 acres. The Great Pyramid is the only one in the group at Giza, in fact, as far as known, the only one in Egypt, that has chambers within the actual body of the pyramid itself. For this reason, it is said to refute the Lepsius law, which asserts that each of these structures is a monument raised over a subterranean chamber in which a ruler is entombed. The pyramid contains 4 chambers, which in the diagram are lettered K, H, F, and O. The King's Chamber, K, is an oblong apartment 39 feet long, 17 feet wide, and 19 feet high, disregarding fractional parts of a foot in each case, with a flat roof consisting of 9 great stones, the largest in the pyramid. Above the King's Chamber are 5 low compartments, L, generally termed construction chambers. In the lowest of these, the so-called hieroglyphics of the pharaoh Cheops are located. The roof of the 5th construction chamber is peaked. At the end of the King's Chamber, opposite the entrance, stands the famous sarcophagus, or coffer, I, and behind it is a shallow opening that was dug in the hope of discovering valuables. 2 air vents, M and N, passing through the entire body of the pyramid, ventilate the King's Chamber. In itself, this is sufficient to establish that the building was not intended for a tomb. Between the upper end of the Grand Gallery, G, and the King's Chamber is a small antechamber, H. Its extreme length 9 feet, its extreme width 5 feet, and its extreme height 12 feet, with its walls grooved for purposes now unknown. In the grooves nearest the Grand Gallery is a slab of stone in 2 sections, with a peculiar boss, or knob, protruding about an inch from the surface of the upper part, facing the Grand Gallery. This stone does not reach to the floor of the antechamber, and those entering the King's Chamber must pass under the slab. From the King's Chamber, the Grand Gallery, 157 feet in length, 28 feet in height, 7 feet in width at its widest point, and decreasing to 3.5 feet as the result of 7 converging overlaps of the stones forming the walls, descends to a little above the level of the Queen's Chamber. Here a gallery, E, branches off, passing more than 100 feet back towards the center of the pyramid and opening into the Queen's Chamber, F. The Queen's Chamber is 19 feet long, 17 feet wide, and 20 feet high. Its roof is peaked and composed of great slabs of stone. Air passages, not shown, lead from the Queen's Chamber, but these were not open originally. In the east wall of the Queen's Chamber is a peculiar niche of gradually converging stone, which, in all likelihood, may prove to be a new lost entranceway. At the point where the Grand Gallery ends and the horizontal passage towards the Queen's Chamber begins is the entrance to the well, and also the opening leading down the first ascending passage, D, to the point where this passage meets the descending passage, A, leading from the outer wall of the pyramid down to the subterranean chamber. After descending 59 feet down the well, P, the grotto is reached. Continuing through the floor of the grotto, the well leads downward 133 feet to the descending entrance passage, A, which it meets a short distance before this passage becomes horizontal and leads into the subterranean chamber. The subterranean chamber, O, is about 46 feet long and 27 feet wide, but is extremely low, the ceiling varying in height from a little over 3 feet to about 13 feet from the rough and apparently unfinished floor. From the south of the subterranean chamber, a low tunnel runs about 50 feet and then meets a blank wall. These constitute the only known openings in the pyramid, with the exception of a few niches, exploration holes, blind passages, and the rambling cavernous tunnel, B, hewn out by the Muslims under the leadership of the Prophet's descendant, Caliph al-Ma'mun. If the passage leading to the King's Chamber and the Queen's Chamber was sealed up thousands of years before the Christian era, those later admitted into the pyramid mysteries must have received their initiations in subterranean galleries now unknown. Without such galleries, there could have been no possible means of ingress or egress, since the single-surface entrance was completely dosed with casing stones. If not blocked by the mass of the Sphinx or concealed in some part of that image, the secret entrance may be either in one of the adjacent temples or upon the sides of the limestone plateau. Attention is called to the granite plugs filling the ascending passageway to the Queen's Chamber, which Caliph al-Ma'mun was forced practically to pulverize before he could clear a way into the upper chambers. C. Piazzi Smith notes that the positions of the stones demonstrate that they were set in place from above, which made it necessary for a considerable number of workmen to depart from the upper chambers. How did they do it? Smith believes they descended through the well, see diagram, dropping the ramp stone into place behind them. He further contends that robbers probably used the well as a means of getting into the upper chambers. The ramp stone having been set in a bed of plaster, the robbers were forced to break through it, leaving a jagged opening. Mr. Dupree, an architect who has spent years investigating the pyramids, differs from Smith, however, in that he believes the well itself to be a robber's hole, being the first successful attempt made to enter the upper chambers from the subterranean chamber, then the only open section of the pyramid. Mr. Dupree bases his conclusion upon the fact that the well is merely a rough hole and the grotto an irregular chamber, without any evidence of the architectural precision with which the remainder of the structure was erected. The diameter of the well also precludes the possibility of its having been dug downward. It must have been gouged out from below, and the grotto was necessary to supply air to the thieves. It is conceivable that the pyramid builders would break one of their own ramp stones and leave its broken surface and a gaping hole in the side wall of their otherwise perfect gallery. If the well is a robber's hole, it may explain why the pyramid was empty when Caliph al-Mamun entered it, and what happened to the missing coffer lid. A careful examination of the so-called unfinished subterranean chamber, which must have been the base of operations for the robbers, might disclose traces of their presence, or show where they piled the rubble, which must have accumulated as a result of their operations. While it is not entirely clear by what entrance the robbers reached the subterranean chamber, it is improbable that they used the descending passageway. There is a remarkable niche in the north wall of the Queen's Chamber, which the Mohammedan guides glibly pronounced to be a shrine. The general shape of this niche, however, with its walls converging by a series of overlaps like those of the Grand Gallery, would indicate that originally it had been intended as a passageway. Efforts made to explore this niche have been non-productive, but Mr. Dupree believes an entrance to exist here through which, if the well did not exist at the time, the workmen made their exit from the pyramid after dropping the stone plugs into the ascending gallery. Biblical scholars have contributed a number of most extraordinary conceptions regarding the Great Pyramid. This ancient edifice has been identified by them as Joseph's granary, despite its hopelessly inadequate capacity, as the tomb prepared for the unfortunate pharaoh of the Exodus, who could not be buried there because his body was never recovered from the Red Sea, and finally, as a perpetual confirmation of the infallibility of the numerous prophecies contained in the authorized version. The Sphinx. Although the Great Pyramid, as Ignatius Donnelly has demonstrated, is patterned after an antediluvian type of structure, examples of which are to be found in nearly every part of the world, the Sphinx, who is typically Egyptian. The stele between its paws states the Sphinx is an image of the sun god, Harmachis, which was evidently made in the similitude of the pharaoh during whose reign it was chiseled. The statue was restored and completely excavated by Thutmose IV as a result of a vision in which the god had appeared and declared himself oppressed by the weight of the sand about his body. The broken beard of the Sphinx was discovered during excavations between the front paws. The steps leading up to the Sphinx and also the temple and altar between the paws are much later additions, probably Roman, for it is known that the Romans reconstructed many Egyptian antiquities. The shallow depression in the crown of the head, once thought to be the terminus of a closed-up passageway leading from the Sphinx to the Great Pyramid, was merely intended to help support a headdress now missing. Oedipus and the Sphinx, from Levy's Les Mystères de la Kabbale. The Egyptian Sphinx is closely related to the Greek legend of Oedipus, who first solved the famous riddle propounded by the mysterious creature with the body of a winged lion and the head of a woman, which frequented the highway leading to Thebes. To each who passed her lair, the Sphinx addressed the question, "What animal is it that in the morning goes on 4 feet, at noon on 2 feet, and in the evening on 3 feet?" These who failed to answer her riddle she destroyed. Oedipus declared the answer to be man himself, who in childhood crawled upon his hands and knees, in manhood stood erect, and in old age shuffled along supporting himself by a staff. Discovering one who knew the answer to her riddle, the Sphinx cast herself from the cliff which bordered the road and perished. There is still another answer to the riddle of the Sphinx, an answer best revealed by a consideration of the Pythagorean values of numbers. The 4, the 2, and the 3 produce the sum of 9, which is the natural number of man and also of the lower worlds. The 4 represents the ignorant man, the 2, the intellectual man, and the 3, the spiritual man. Infant humanity walks on 4 legs, evolving humanity on 2 legs, and to the power of his own mind, the redeemed and illumined Magus adds the staff of wisdom. The Sphinx is therefore the mystery of nature, the embodiment of the secret doctrine, and all who cannot solve her riddle perish. To pass the Sphinx is to attain personal immortality. Metal rods have been driven into the Sphinx in a vain effort to discover chambers or passages within its body. The major part of the Sphinx is a single stone, but the front paws have been built up of smaller stones. The Sphinx is about 200 feet long, 70 feet high, and 38 feet wide across at the shoulders. The main stone from which it was carved is believed by some to have been transported from distant quarries by methods unknown, while others assert it to be native rock, possibly an outcropping somewhat resembling the form into which it was later carved. The theory once advanced that both the pyramid and the Sphinx were built from artificial stones made on the spot has been abandoned. A careful analysis of the limestone shows it to be composed of small sea creatures called mummulites. The popular supposition that the Sphinx was the true portal of the Great Pyramid, while it survives with surpassing tenacity, has never been substantiated. P. Christian presents this theory as follows, basing it in part upon the authority of Iamblichus. The Sphinx of Giza, says the author of the Traité des Mystères, served as the entrance to the sacred subterranean chambers in which the trials of the initiate were undergone. This entrance, obstructed in our day by sands and rubbish, may still be traced between the forelegs of the crouched colossus. It was formerly closed by a bronze gate whose secret spring could be operated only by the Magi. It was guarded by public respect, and a sort of religious fear maintained its inviolability better than armed protection would have done. In the belly of the Sphinx were cut out galleries leading to the subterranean part of the Great Pyramid. These galleries were so artfully crisscrossed along their course to the pyramid that in setting forth into the passage without a guide through this network, one ceaselessly and inevitably returned to the starting point. See Histoire de la Magi. Unfortunately, the bronze door referred to cannot be found, nor is there any evidence that it ever existed. The passing centuries have wrought many changes in the Colossus, however, and the original opening may have been closed. Nearly all students of the subject believe that subterranean chambers exist beneath the Great Pyramid. Robert Ballard writes, "The priests of the Pyramid of Lake Moeris had their vast subterranean residences. It appears to me more than probable that those of Giza were similarly provided, and I may go further. Out of these very caverns may have been excavated the limestone of which the pyramids were built. In the bowels of the limestone ridge on which the pyramids are built will yet be found, I feel convinced, ample information as to their uses. A good diamond drill with 200 or 300 feet of rods is what is wanted to test this, and the solidarity of the pyramids at the same time. See the solution of the pyramid problem." Mr. Ballard's theory of extensive underground apartments and quarries brings up an important problem in architectonics. The pyramid builders were too far-sighted to endanger the permanence of the Great Pyramid by placing over 5 million tons of limestone and granite on any but a solid foundation. It is therefore reasonably certain that such chambers or passageways as may exist beneath the building are relatively insignificant, like those within the body of the structure, which occupy less than 1/1600th of the cubic contents of the pyramid. The Sphinx was undoubtedly erected for symbolical purposes at the instigation of the priestcraft. The theories that the uraeus upon its forehead was originally the finger of an immense sundial, and that both the pyramid and the Sphinx were used to measure time, the seasons, and the precession of the equinoxes, are ingenious but not wholly convincing. If this giant creature was erected to obliterate the ancient passageway leading into the subterranean temple of the pyramid, its symbolism would be most appropriate. In comparison with the overwhelming size and dignity of the Great Pyramid, the Sphinx is almost insignificant. Its battered face, upon which may still be seen vestiges of the red paint with which the figure was originally covered, is disfigured beyond recognition. Its nose was broken off by a fanatical Mohammedan, lest the followers of the Prophet be led into idolatry. The very nature of its construction and the present repairs necessary to prevent the head from falling off indicate that it could not have survived the great periods of time which have elapsed since the erection of the pyramid. To the Egyptians, the Sphinx was the symbol of strength and intelligence. It was portrayed as androgynous to signify that they recognized the initiates and gods as partaking of both the positive and negative creative powers. Gerald Massey writes, "This is the secret of the Sphinx. The Orthodox Sphinx of Egypt is masculine in front and feminine behind. So is the image of Sut Typhon, a type of horn and tail, male in front and female behind. The pharaohs, who wore the tail of the lioness or cow behind them, were male in front and female behind. Like the gods, They included the dual totality of being in one person, born of the mother but of both sexes as the child. See the natural genesis. Most investigators have ridiculed the Sphinx and, without even deigning to investigate the great colossus, have turned their attention to the more overwhelming mystery of the pyramid. The Pyramid Mysteries. The word pyramid is popularly supposed to be derived from fire, thus signifying that it is the symbolic representation of the one divine flame, the life of every creature. John Taylor believes the word pyramid to mean a measure of wheat, while C. Piazzi Smith favors the Coptic meaning, a division into 10. The initiates of old accepted the pyramid form as the ideal symbol of both the secret doctrine and those institutions established for its dissemination. Both pyramids and mounds are antitypes of the holy mountain or high place of God, which was believed to stand in the midst of the earth. John P. Lundy relates the Great Pyramid to the fabled Olympus, further assuming that its subterranean passages correspond to the tortuous byways of Hades. The square base of the pyramid is a constant reminder that the House of Wisdom is firmly founded upon nature and her immutable laws. The Gnostics, writes Albert Pike, claimed that the whole edifice of their science rested on a square whose angles were silence, profundity, intelligence, and truth. See Morals and Dogma. The sides of the Great Pyramid face the 4 cardinal angles, the latter signifying, according to Eliphas Levi, the extremities of heat and cold, north and south, and the extremities of light and darkness, east and west. The base of the pyramid further represents the 4 material elements or substances from the combinations of which the quaternary body of man is formed. From each side of the square there rises a triangle, typifying the threefold divine being enthroned within every quaternary material nature. If each base line be considered a square from which ascends a threefold spiritual power, then the sum of the lines of the 4 faces, 12, and the 4 hypothetical squares, 16, constituting the base, is 28, the sacred number of the lower world. If this be added to the 3 septenaries composing the sun, 21, it equals 49, the square of 7 and the number of the universe. The 12 signs of the zodiac, like the governors of the lower worlds, are symbolized by the 12 lines of the 4 triangles, the faces of the pyramid. In the midst of each face is one of the beasts of Ezekiel, and the structure as a whole becomes the cherubim. The 3 main chambers of the pyramid are related to the heart, the brain, and the generative system, the spiritual centers of the human constitution. The triangular form of the pyramid also is similar to the posture assumed by the body during the ancient meditative exercises. The mysteries taught that the divine energies from the gods descended upon the top of the pyramid, which was likened to an inverted tree with its branches below and its roots at the apex. From this inverted tree, the divine wisdom is disseminated by streaming down the diverging sides and radiating throughout the world. The size of the capstone of the Great Pyramid cannot be accurately determined, for, while most investigators have assumed that it was once in place, no vestige of it now remains. There is a curious tendency among the builders of great religious edifices to leave their creations unfinished, thereby signifying that God alone is complete. The capstone, if it existed, was itself a miniature pyramid, the apex of which again would be capped by a smaller block of similar shape, and so on, ad infinitum. The capstone, therefore, is the epitome of the entire structure. Thus, the pyramid may be likened to the universe, and the capstone to man. Following the chain of analogy, the mind is the capstone of man, the spirit, the capstone of the mind, and God, the epitome of the whole, the capstone of the spirit. As a rough and unfinished block, man is taken from the quarry and by the secret culture of the mysteries, gradually transformed into a true and perfect pyramidal capstone. The temple is complete only when the initiate himself becomes the living apex, through which the divine power is focused into the diverging structure below. W. Marsham Adams calls the Great Pyramid the House of the Hidden Places. Such indeed it was, for it represented the inner sanctuary of pre-Egyptian wisdom. By the Egyptians, the Great Pyramid was associated with Hermes, the god of wisdom and letters, and the divine illuminator worshipped through the planet Mercury. Relating Hermes to the pyramid emphasizes anew the fact that it was in reality the supreme temple of the invisible and supreme deity. The Great Pyramid was not a lighthouse, an observatory, or a tomb, but the first temple of the mysteries, the first structure erected as a repository for those secret truths which are the certain foundation of all arts and sciences. It was the perfect emblem of the microcosm and the macrocosm, and according to the secret teachings of the tomb of Osiris, the black god of the Nile, Osiris represents a certain manifestation of solar energy, and therefore his house or tomb is emblematic of the universe within which he is entombed and upon the cross of which he is crucified. Through the mystic passageways and chambers of the Great Pyramid, past the illumined of antiquity, they entered its portals as men. They came forth as gods. It was the place of the second birth, the womb of the mysteries, and wisdom dwelt in it as God dwells in the hearts of men. Somewhere in the depths of its recesses, there resided an unknown being who was called the Initiator, or the Illustrious One, robed in blue and gold, and bearing in his hand the sevenfold key of eternity. This was the lion-faced Hierophant, the Holy One, the Master of Masters, who never left the house of wisdom, and whom no man ever saw, save he who passed through the gates of preparation and purification. It was in these chambers that Plato, he of the broad brow, came face to face with the wisdom of the ages, personified in the master of the hidden house. Who was the master dwelling in the mighty pyramid, the many rooms of which signified the worlds in space, the master whom none might behold save those who had been born again? He alone fully knew the secret of the pyramid, but he has departed the way of the wise, and the house is empty. The hymns of praise no longer echo in muffled tones through the chambers. The neophyte no longer passes through the elements and wanders among the seven stars. The candidate no longer receives the word of life from the lips of the Eternal One. Nothing now remains that the eye of man can see but an empty shell, the outer symbol of an inner truth, and men call the house of God a tomb. The technique of the mysteries was unfolded by the sage illuminator, the master of the secret house. The power to know his guardian spirit was revealed to the new initiate. The method of disentangling his material body from his divine vehicle was explained, and to consummate the magnum opus, there was revealed the divine name, the secret and unutterable designation of the supreme deity, by the fairy knowledge of which man and his God are made consciously one. With the giving of the name, the new initiate became himself a pyramid, within the chambers of whose soul numberless other human beings might also receive spiritual enlightenment. In the king's chamber was enacted the drama of the second death. Here the candidate, after being crucified upon the cross of the solstices and the equinoxes, was buried in the great coffer. There is a profound mystery to the atmosphere and temperature of the king's chamber. It is of a peculiar death-like cold, which cuts to the marrow of the bone. This room was a doorway between the material world and the transcendental spheres of nature. While his body lay in the coffer, the soul of the neophyte soared as a human-headed hawk through the celestial realms, there to discover firsthand the eternity of life, light, and truth, as well as the illusion of death, darkness, and sin. Thus, in one sense, the Great Pyramid may be likened to a gate through which the ancient priests permitted a few to pass toward the attainment of individual completion. It is also to be noted, incidentally, that if the coffer in the king's chamber be struck, the sound emitted has no counterpart in any known musical scale. This tonal value may have formed part of that combination of circumstances which rendered the king's chamber an ideal setting for the conferment of the highest degree of the mysteries. The modern world knows little of these ancient rites. The scientist and the theologian alike gaze upon the sacred structure, wondering what fundamental urge inspired the Herculean labor. If they would but think for a moment, they would realize that there is only one urge in the soul of man capable of supplying the required incentive, namely, the desire to know, to understand, and to exchange the narrowness of human mortality for the greater breadth and scope of divine enlightenment. So men say of the Great Pyramid that it is the most perfect building in the world, the source of weights and measures, the original Noah's Ark, the origin of languages, alphabets, and scales of temperature and humidity. Few realize, however, that it is the gateway to the eternal. Though the modern world may know a million secrets, the ancient world knew one, and that one was greater than the million, for the million secrets breed death, disaster, sorrow, selfishness, lust, and avarice, but the one secret confers life, light, and truth. The time will come when the secret wisdom shall again be the dominating religious and philosophical urge of the world. The day is at hand when the doom of dogma shall be sounded. The great theological tower of Babel, with its confusion of tongues, was built of bricks of mud and the mortar of slime. Out of the cold ashes of lifeless creeds, however, shall rise, phoenix-like, the ancient mysteries. No other institution has so completely satisfied the religious aspirations of humanity, for since the destruction of the mysteries, there never has been a religious code to which Plato could have subscribed. The unfolding of man's spiritual nature is as much an exact science as astronomy, medicine, or jurisprudence. To accomplish this end, religions were primarily established, and out of religion have come science, philosophy, and logic as methods whereby this divine purpose might be realized. The dying God shall rise again. The secret room in the house of the hidden places shall be rediscovered. The pyramid again shall stand as the ideal emblem of solidarity, inspiration, aspiration, resurrection, and regeneration. As the passing sands of time bury civilization upon civilization beneath their weight, the pyramid shall remain as the visible covenant between eternal wisdom and the world. The time may yet come when the chants of the illumined shall be heard once more in its ancient passageways, and the master of the hidden house shall await in the silent place for the coming of that man who, casting aside the fallacies of dogma and tenet, seeks simply truth, and will be satisfied with neither substitute nor counterfeit. Isis, the Virgin of the World. It is especially fitting that a study of Hermetic symbolism should begin with a discussion of the symbols and attributes of the Saitic Isis. This is the Isis of Sais, famous for the inscription concerning her which appeared on the front of her temple in that city. I, Isis, am all that has been, that is or shall be. No mortal man hath ever me unveiled. Plutarch affirms that many ancient authors believed this goddess to be the daughter of Hermes. Others held the opinion that she was the child of Prometheus. Both of these demigods were noted for their divine wisdom. It is not improbable that her kinship to them is merely allegorical. Plutarch translates the name Isis to mean wisdom. Godfrey Higgins, in his Anacalypsis, derives the name of Isis from the Hebrew iso and the Greek to save. Some authorities, however, for example, Richard Payne Knight, as stated in his Symbolical Language of Ancient Art and Mythology, believe the word to be of northern extraction, possibly Scandinavian or Gothic. In these languages, the name is pronounced Isa, meaning ice, or water in its most passive, crystallized, negative state. This Egyptian deity, under many names, appears as the principle of natural fecundity among nearly all the religions of the ancient world. She was known as the goddess with 10,000 appellations, and was metamorphosed by Christianity into the Virgin Mary. For Isis, although she gave birth to all living things, chief among them the sun, still remained a virgin, according to the legendary accounts. Apuleius, in the 11th book of the Golden Ass, ascribes to the goddess the following statement concerning her powers and attributes. Behold, I, moved by thy prayers, am present with thee. I, who am nature, the parent of things, the queen of all the elements, the primordial progeny of ages, the supreme of divinities, the sovereign of the spirits of the dead, the first of the celestials, and the uniform resemblance of gods and goddesses. I, who rule by my nod the luminous summits of the heavens, the salubrious breezes of the seas, and the deplorable silences of the realms beneath, and whose one divinity the whole orb of the earth venerates under a manifold form, by different rites and a variety of appellations. Hence the primogenial Phrygians call me Pessinuntica, the mother of the gods, the Attic Aborigines, Cecropian Minerva, the floating Cyprians, Paphian Venus, the arrow-bearing Cretans, Diana, Dictina, the three-tongued Sicilians, Stygian, Prosperine, and the Eleusinians, the ancient goddess Ceres. Some also call me Juno, others Bellona, others Hecate, and others Rhamnusia. And those who are illuminated by the incipient rays of that divinity, the sun, when he rises, viz., the Ethiopians, the Ari, and the Egyptians skilled in ancient learning, worshipping me by ceremonies perfectly appropriate, call me by my true name, Queen Isis. Le Plongeon believes that the Egyptian myth of Isis had a historical basis among the Mayas of Central America, where the goddess was known as Queen Mu. In Prince Ko, the same author finds a correspondence to Osiris, the brother-husband of Isis. Le Plongeon's theory that Mayan civilization was far more ancient than that of Egypt. After the death of Prince Ko, his widow, Queen Mu, fleeing to escape the wrath of his murderers, sought refuge among the Mayan colonies in Egypt, where she was accepted as their queen and was given the name of Isis. While Le Plongeon may be right, the possible historical queen sinks into insignificance when compared with the allegorical, symbolic world virgin, and the fact that she appears among so many different races and peoples discredits the theory that she was a historical individual. Isis, Queen of Heaven, from Mosses' History des Hébreux Chrétiens. Diodorus writes of a famous inscription carved on a column at Nyssa, in Arabia, wherein Isis described herself as follows: I am Isis, queen of this country. I was instructed by Mercury. No one can destroy the laws which I have established. I am the eldest daughter of Saturn, most ancient of the gods. I am the wife and sister of Osiris the king. I first made known to mortals the use of wheat. I am the mother of Oros the king. In my honor was the city of Bubast built. Rejoice, O Egypt, rejoice, land that gave me birth. See Morals and Dogma by Albert Pike. According to Sextus Empiricus, the Trojan War was fought over a statue of the moon goddess. For this lunar Helena, and not for a woman, the Greeks and Trojans struggled at the gates of Troy. Several authors have attempted to prove that Isis, Osiris, Typhon, Nephthys, and Aurorius, Thoth or Mercury, were grandchildren of the great Jewish patriarch Noah by his son Ham. But as the story of Noah and his ark is a cosmic allegory concerning the repopulation of planets at the beginning of each world period, this only makes it less likely that they were historical personages. According to Robert Flood, the sun has three properties: life, light, and heat. These three vivify and vitalize the three worlds: spiritual, intellectual, and material. Therefore, it is said, from one light, three lights, i.e., the first three master masons. In all probability, Osiris represents the third, or material, aspect of solar activity, which by its beneficent influences vitalizes and enlivens the flora and fauna of the earth. Osiris is not the sun, but the sun is symbolic of the vital principle of nature, which the ancients knew as Osiris. His symbol, therefore, was an opened eye, in honor of the great eye of the universe, the sun, opposed to the active, radiant principle of impregnating fire. Heat and motion was the passive, receptive principle of nature. Modern science has proved that forms ranging in magnitude from solar systems to atoms are composed of positive, radiant nuclei, surrounded by negative bodies that exist upon the emanations of the central life. From this allegory we have the story of Solomon and his wives, where Solomon is the sun and his wives and concubines are the planets, moons, asteroids, and other receptive bodies within his house, the solar mansion. Isis, represented in the Song of Solomon by the Dark Maid of Jerusalem, is symbolic of receptive nature, the watery, maternal principle which creates all things out of herself after impregnation has been achieved by the virility of the sun. In the ancient world, the year had 360 days. The 5 extra days were gathered together by the god of cosmic intelligence to serve as the birthdays of the 5 gods and goddesses who are called the sons and daughters of Ham. Upon the first of these special days, Osiris was born, and upon the 4th of them, Isis. The number 4 shows the relation that this goddess bears to the earth and its elements. Typhon, The Egyptian demon or spirit of the adversary was born upon the third day. Typhon is often symbolized by a crocodile. Sometimes his body is a combination of crocodile and hog. Isis stands for knowledge and wisdom, and according to Plutarch, the word Typhon means insolence and pride. Egotism, self-centeredness, and pride are the deadly enemies of understanding and truth. This part of the allegory is revealed. After Osiris, here symbolized as the sun, had become king of Egypt and had given to his people the full advantage of his intellectual light, he continued his path through the heavens, visiting the peoples of other nations and converting all with whom he came in contact. Plutarch further asserts that the Greek recognized in Osiris the same person whom they revered under the name of Dionysus and Bacchus. While he was away from his country, his brother Typhon, the evil one, like the Loki of Scandinavia, plotted against the sun god to destroy him. Gathering 72 persons as fellow conspirators, he attained his nefarious end in a most subtle manner. He had a wonderful ornamented box, made just the size of the body of Osiris. This he brought into a banquet hall where the gods and goddesses were feasting together. All admired the beautiful chest, and Typhon promised to give it to the one whose body fitted it most perfectly. One after another lay down in the box, but in disappointment rose again, until at last Osiris also tried. The moment he was in the chest, Typhon and his accomplices nailed the cover down and sealed the cracks with molten lead. They then cast the box into the Nile, down which it floated to the sea. Plutarch states that the date upon which this occurred was the 17th day of the month, Aether, when the sun was in the constellation of Scorpio. This is most significant, for the scorpion is the symbol of treachery. The time when Osiris entered the chest was also the same season that Noah entered the ark to escape from the deluge. Plutarch further declares that the Pans and Satyrs, the nature spirits and elementals, first discovered that Osiris had been murdered. These immediately raised an alarm, and from this incident, the word panic, meaning fright or amazement of the multitudes, originated. Isis, upon receiving the news of her husband's murder, which she learned from some children who had seen the murderers making off with the box, at once robed herself in mourning and started forth in quest of him. At length, Isis discovered that the chest had floated to the coast of Byblos. There it had lodged in the branches of a tree, which in a short time miraculously grew up around the box. This so amazed the king of that country that he ordered the tree to be cut down and a pillar made from its trunk to support the roof of his palace. Isis, visiting Byblos, recovered the body of her husband, but it was again stolen by Typhon, who cut it into 14 parts, which he scattered all over the earth. Isis, in despair, began gathering up the severed remains of her husband, but found only 13 pieces. The 14th part, the phallus, she reproduced in gold, for the original had fallen into the river Nile and had been swallowed by a fish. Typhon was later slain in battle by the son of Osiris. Some of the Egyptians believed that the souls of the gods were taken to heaven, where they shone forth as stars. It was supposed that the soul of Isis gleamed from the dog star, while Typhon became the constellation of the bear. It is doubtful, however, whether this idea was ever generally accepted. Among the Egyptians, Isis is often represented with a headdress consisting of the empty throne chair of her murdered husband, and this peculiar structure was accepted during certain dynasties as her hieroglyphic. The headdresses of the Egyptians have great symbolic and emblematic importance, for they represent the auric bodies of these superhuman intelligences, and are used in the same way that the nimbus, halo, and aureole are used in Christian religious art. Frank C. Higgins, a well-known Masonic symbolist, has astutely noted that the ornate headgears of certain gods and pharaohs are inclined backward at the same angle as the Earth's axis. The robes, insignia, jewels, and ornamentations of the ancient hierophants symbolize the spiritual energies radiating from the human body. Modern science is rediscovering many of the lost secrets of Hermetic philosophy. One of these is the ability to gauge the mental development, the soul qualities, and the physical health of an individual from the streamers of semi-visible electric force which pour through the surface of the skin of every human being at all times during his life. For details concerning a scientific process for making the auric emanations visible, see The Human Atmosphere by Dr. Walter J. Kilner. Isis is sometimes symbolized by the head of a cow. Occasionally, the entire animal is her symbol. The first gods of the Scandinavians were licked out of blocks of ice by the mother cow, Audhumla, who symbolized the principle of natural nutriment and fecundity because of her milk. Occasionally, Isis is represented as a bird. She often carries in one hand the crux ansata, the symbol of eternal life, and in the other the flowered scepter, symbolic of her authority. Thoth, Hermes Trismegistus, the founder of Egyptian learning, the wise man of the ancient world, gave to the priests and philosophers of antiquity the secrets which have been preserved to this day in myth and legend. These allegories and emblematic figures concealed the secret formulae for spiritual, mental, moral, and physical regeneration, commonly known as the mystic chemistry of the soul, or alchemy. These sublime truths were communicated to the initiates of the mystery schools, but were concealed from the profane. The latter, unable to understand the abstract philosophical tenets, worshipped the concrete sculptured idols which were emblematic of these secret truths. The wisdom and secrecy of Egypt are epitomized in the Sphinx, which has preserved its secrets from the seekers of 100 generations. The mysteries of Hermeticism, the great spiritual truths hidden from the world by the ignorance of the world, and the keys of the secret doctrines of the ancient philosophers, are all symbolized by the Virgin Isis. Veiled from head to foot, she reveals her wisdom only to the tried and initiated few who have earned the right to enter her sacred presence, tear from the veiled figure of nature its shroud of obscurity, and stand face to face with the divine reality. The explanations in these pages of the symbols peculiar to the Virgin Isis are based, unless otherwise noted, on selections from a free translation of the fourth book of Bibliotheque des Philosophes Hermetiques, entitled The Hermetical Signification of the Symbols and Attributes of Isis, with interpolations by the compiler to amplify and clarify the text. The statues of Isis were decorated with the sun, moon, and stars, and many emblems pertaining to the earth, over which Isis was believed to rule, as the guardian spirit of nature personified. Several images of the goddess have been found, upon which the marks of her dignity and position were still intact. According to the ancient philosophers, she personified universal nature, the mother of all productions. The deity was generally represented as a partly nude woman, often pregnant, sometimes loosely covered with a garment of either green or black color, or of 4 different shades intermingled black, white, yellow, and red. Apuleius describes her as follows. In the first place, then, her most copious and long hairs, being gradually intorted, and promiscuously scattered on her divine neck, were softly defluous. A multiform crown, consisting of various flowers, bound the sublime summit of her head, and in the middle of the crown, just on her forehead, there was a smooth orb resembling a mirror, or rather a white, refulgent light, which indicated that she was the moon. Vipers rising up after the manner of furrows environed the crown on the right hand and on the left, and cerulean ears of corn were also extended from above. Her garment was of many colors, and woven from the finest flax, and was at one time lucid with a white splendor, at another yellow from the flower of crocus, and at another flaming with a rosy redness. But that which most excessively dazzled my sight was a very black robe, flugid with a dark splendor, and which, spreading round and passing under her right side, and ascending to her left shoulder, there rose protuberant, like the center of a shield, the dependent part of the robe falling in many folds, and having small knots of fringe, gracefully flowing in its extremities. Glittering stars were dispersed through the embroidered border of the robe, and through the whole of its surface. And the full moon, shining in the middle of the stars, breathed forth flaming fires. Nevertheless, a crown, wholly consisting of flowers and fruits of every kind, adhered with indivisible connection to the border of that conspicuous robe and all its undulating motions. What she carried in her hands also consisted of things of a very different nature. For her right hand, indeed, bore a brazen rattle, or sistrum, through the narrow lamina of which bent like a belt. Certain rods passing produced a sharp triple sound, through the vibrating motion of her arm. An oblong vessel in the shape of a boat depended from her left hand, on the handle of which, in that part in which it was conspicuous, an asp raised its erect head and largely swelling neck, and shoes, woven from the leaves of the victorious palm tree, covered her immortal feet. The sistrum. The sistrum is designed to represent to us that everything must be kept in continual agitation and never cease from motion, that they ought to be mused and well shaken whenever they begin to grow drowsy, as it were, and to droop in their motion. For, say they, the sound of these sistra averts and drives away typho, meaning hereby that as corruption clogs and puts a stop to the regular course of nature, so generation, by the means of motion, loosens it again and restores it to its former vigor. Now the outer surface of this instrument is of a convex figure, as within its circumference are contained those 4 chords or bars, only 3 shown, which make such a rattling when they are shaken. Nor is this without its meaning, for that part of the universe which is subject to generation and corruption is contained within the sphere of the moon, and whatever motions or changes may happen therein, they are all effected by the different combinations of the 4 elementary bodies, fire, earth, water, and air. Moreover, upon the upper part of the convex surface of the sistrum is carved the effigies of a cat with a human visage, as on the lower edge of it, under those moving chords, is engraved on the one side the face of Isis, and on the other that of Nephthys, by the faces symbolically representing generation and corruption, which, as has been already observed, is nothing but the motion and alteration of the 4 elements, one amongst another. From Plutarch's Isis and Osiris, the green color alludes to the vegetation which covers the face of the earth, and therefore represents the robe of nature. The black represents death and corruption as being the way to a new life and generation. Except a man be born again, he cannot see the kingdom of God. John 3:3. White, yellow, and red signify the 3 principal colors of the alchemical, hermetical, universal medicine after the blackness of its putrefaction is over. The ancients gave the name Isis to one of their occult medicines. Therefore, the description here given relates somewhat to chemistry. Her black drape also signifies that the moon, or the lunar humidity, the sophic universal mercury, and the operating substance of nature in alchemical terminology, has no light of its own, but receives its light, its fire, and its vitalizing force from the sun. Isis was the image or representative of the great works of the wise men, the philosopher's stone, the elixir of life, and the universal medicine. Other hieroglyphics seen in connection with Isis are no less curious than those already described, but it is impossible to enumerate all, for many symbols were used interchangeably by the Egyptian hermeticists. The goddess often wore upon her head a hat made of cypress branches, to signify mourning for her dead husband, and also for the physical death which she caused every creature to undergo in order to receive a new life in posterity, or a periodic resurrection. The head of Isis is sometimes ornamented with a crown of gold or a garland of olive leaves, as conspicuous marks of her sovereignty as queen of the world and mistress of the entire universe. The crown of gold signifies also the aurific unctuosity or sulphurous fatness of the solar and vital fires, which she dispenses to every individual by a continual circulation of the elements. This circulation being symbolized by the musical rattle which she carries in her hand. This sistrum is also the Ionic symbol of purity. A serpent, interwoven among the olive leaves on her head, devouring its own tail, denotes that the aurific unctuosity was soiled with the venom of terrestrial corruption which surrounded it, and must be mortified and purified by 7 planetary circulations or purifications called flying eagles, alchemical terminology, in order to make it medicinal for the restoration of health. Here the emanations from the sun are recognized as a medicine for the healing of human ills. The 7 planetary circulations are represented by the circumambulations of the Masonic Lodge, by the marching of the Jewish priests 7 times around the walls of Jericho, and of the Mohammedan priests 7 times around the Kaaba at Mecca. From the crown of gold project 3 horns of plenty, signifying the abundance of the gifts of nature proceeding from one root having its origin in the heavens, head of Isis. In this figure, the pagan naturalists represent all the vital powers of the 3 kingdoms and families of sublunary, nature mineral, plant, and animal, man considered as an animal. At one of her ears was the moon and at the other the sun, to indicate that these 2 were the agent and patient, or father and mother principles of all natural objects, and that Isis, or nature, makes use of these 2 luminaries to communicate her powers to the whole empire of animals, vegetables, and minerals. On the back of her neck were the characters of the planets and the signs of the zodiac, which assisted the planets in their functions. This signified that the heavenly influences directed the destinies of the principles and sperms of all things, because they were the governors of all sublunary bodies, which they transformed into little worlds made in the image of the greater universe. Isis holds in her right hand a small sailing ship with the spindle of a spinning wheel for its mast. From the top of the mast projects a water jug, its handle shaped like a serpent swelled with venom. This indicates that Isis steers the bark of life, full of troubles and miseries, on the stormy ocean of time. The spindle symbolizes the fact that she spins and cuts the thread of life. These emblems further signify that Isis abounds in humidity, by means of which she nourishes all natural bodies, preserving them from the heat of the sun by humidifying them with nutritious moisture from the atmosphere. Moisture supports vegetation, but this subtle humidity, or life ether, is always more or less infected by some venom proceeding from corruption or decay. It must be purified by being brought into contact with the invisible cleansing fire of nature. This fire digests, perfects, and revitalizes the substance, in order that the humidity may become a universal medicine to heal and renew all the bodies in nature. The serpent throws off its skin annually and is thereby renewed, symbolic of the resurrection of the spiritual life from the material nature. This renewal of the earth takes place every spring, when the vivifying spirit of the sun returns to the countries of the northern hemisphere. The symbolic virgin carries in her left hand a sistrum and a cymbal, or square frame of metal, which, when struck, gives the keynote of nature, Ba. Sometimes also an olive branch to indicate the harmony she preserves among natural things with her regenerating power. By the process of death and corruption, she gives life to a number of creatures of diverse forms through periods of perpetual change. The symbol is made square instead of the usual triangular shape in order to symbolize that all things are transmuted and regenerated according to the harmony of the 4 elements. Dr. Sigismund Backstrom believed that if a physician could establish harmony among the elements of earth, fire, air, and water, and unite them into a stone, the Philosopher's Stone, symbolized by the 6-pointed star or 2 interlaced triangles, he would possess the means of healing all disease. Dr. Backstrom further stated that there was no doubt in his mind that the universal, omnipresent fire, or spirit of nature, does all and is all in all. By attraction, repulsion, motion, heat, sublimation, evaporation, excisation, inspissation, coagulation, and fixation, the universal fire, or spirit, manipulates matter and manifests throughout creation. Any individual who can understand these principles and adapt them to the 3 departments of nature becomes a true philosopher. From the right breast of Isis protruded a bunch of grapes, and, from the left, an ear of corn or a sheaf of wheat, golden in color. These indicate that nature is the source of nutrition for plant, animal, and human life, nourishing all things from herself. The golden color in the wheat, or corn, indicates that in the sunlight or spiritual gold is concealed the first sperm of all life. On the girdle surrounding the upper part of the body of the statue appear a number of mysterious emblems. The girdle is joined together in front by 4 golden plates, the elements, placed in the form of a square. This signified that Isis, or nature, the first matter, alchemical terminology, was the essence of the 4 elements, life, light, heat, and force, which quintessence generated all things. Numerous stars are represented on this girdle, thereby indicating their influence in darkness, as well as the influence of the sun in light. Isis is the virgin immortalized in the constellation of Virgo, where the World Mother is placed with the serpent under her feet and a crown of stars on her head. In her arms she carries a sheaf of grain and sometimes the young sun god. The statue of Isis was placed on a pedestal of dark stone ornamented with ram's heads. Her feet trod upon a number of venomous reptiles. This indicates that nature has power to free from acidity or saltness all corrosives and to overcome all impurities from terrestrial corruption adhering to bodies. The ram's head indicate that the most auspicious time for the generation of life is during the period when the sun passes through the sign of Aries. The serpents under her feet indicate that nature is inclined to preserve life and to heal disease by expelling impurities and corruption. In this sense, the axioms known to the ancient philosophers are verified, namely, nature contains nature. Nature rejoices in her own nature. Nature surmounts nature. Nature cannot be amended but in her own nature. Therefore, in contemplating the statue of Isis, we must not lose sight of the occult sense of its allegories. Otherwise, the Virgin remains an inexplicable enigma. From a golden ring on her left arm, a line descends, to the end of which is suspended a deep box filled with flaming coals and incense. Isis, or nature personified, carries with her the sacred fire, religiously preserved and kept burning in a special temple by the Vestal Virgins. This fire is the genuine, immortal flame of nature, ethereal, essential, the author of life, the inconsumable oil, the balsam of life, so much praised by the wise and so often referred to in the scriptures, is frequently symbolized as the fuel of this immortal flame. From the right arm of the figure also descends a thread, to the end of which is fastened a pair of scales, to denote the exactitude of nature in her weights and measures. Isis is often represented as the symbol of justice, because nature is eternally consistent. The Egyptian Madonna, from Lenore's La Franche Maçonnerie. Isis is shown with her son Horus in her arms. She is crowned with the lunar orb, ornamented with the horns of rams or bulls. Horus, or Horus as he is more generally known, was the son of Isis and Osiris. He was the god of time, hours, days, and this narrow span of life recognized as mortal existence. In all probability, the four sons of Horus represent the four kingdoms of nature. It was Horus who finally avenged the murder of his father Osiris by slaying Typhon, the spirit of evil. The World Virgin is sometimes shown standing between two great pillars, the Akin and Boaz of Freemasonry, symbolizing the fact that nature attains productivity by means of polarity. As wisdom personified, Isis stands between the pillars of opposites, demonstrating that understanding is always found at the point of equilibrium, and that truth is often crucified between the two thieves of apparent contradiction. The sheen of gold in her dark hair indicates that, while she is lunar, her power is due to the sun's rays, from which she secures her ruddy complexion. As the moon is robed in the reflected light of the sun, so Isis, like the Virgin of Revelation, is clothed in the glory of solar luminosity. Apuleius states that while he was sleeping, he beheld the venerable goddess Isis rising out of the ocean. The ancients realized that the primary forms of life first came out of water, and modern science concurs with this view. H.G. Wells, in his Outline of History, describing primitive life on Earth, states, "But though the ocean and intertidal water already swarmed with life, the land above the high tide line was still, so far as we can guess, a stony wilderness without a trace of life." In the next chapter he adds, "Wherever the shoreline ran, there was life, and that life went on, in and by, and with water as its home, its medium, and its fundamental necessity." The ancients believed that the universal sperm proceeded from warm vapor, humid but fiery. The veiled Isis, whose very coverings represent vapor, is symbolic of this humidity, which is the carrier or vehicle for the sperm life of the sun, represented by a child in her arms. Because the sun, moon, and stars in setting appear to sink into the sea, and also because the water receives their rays into itself, the sea was believed to be the breeding ground for the sperm of living things. This sperm is generated from the combination of the influences of the celestial bodies. Hence, Isis is sometimes represented as pregnant. Frequently, the statue of Isis was accompanied by the figure of a large black and white ox. The ox represents either Osiris as Taurus, the bull of the zodiac, or Apis, an animal sacred to Osiris because of its peculiar markings and colorings. Among the Egyptians, the bull was a beast of burden. Hence, the presence of the animal was a reminder of the labors patiently performed by nature, that all creatures may have life and health. Harpocrates, the god of silence, holding his fingers to his mouth, often accompanies the statue of Isis. He warns all to keep the secrets of the wise from those unfit to know them. The Druids of Britain and Gaul had a deep knowledge concerning the mysteries of Isis and worshipped her under the symbol of the moon. Godfrey Higgins considers it a mistake to regard Isis as synonymous with the moon. The moon was chosen for Isis because of its dominion over water. The Druids consider the sun to be the father and the moon the mother of all things. By means of these symbols, they worshipped universal nature. The figure of Isis is sometimes used to represent the occult and magical arts, such as necromancy, invocation, sorcery, and thaumaturgy. In one of the myths concerning her, Isis is said to have conjured the invincible god of eternities, Ra, to tell her his secret and sacred name, which he did. This name is equivalent to the lost word of masonry. By means of this word, a magician can demand obedience from the invisible and superior deities. The priests of Isis became adepts in the use of the unseen forces of nature. They understood hypnotism, mesmerism, and similar practices long before the modern world dreamed of their existence. Plutarch describes the requisites of a follower of Isis in this manner. For as 'tis not the length of the beard, or the coarseness of the habit which makes a philosopher, so neither will those frequent shavings, or the mere wearing of a linen vestment, constitute a votary of Isis. But he alone is a true servant or follower of this goddess, who, after he has heard and been made acquainted in a proper manner with the history of the actions of these gods, searches into the hidden truths which he concealed under them, and examines the whole by the dictates of reason and philosophy. During the Middle Ages, the troubadours of Central Europe preserved in song the legends of this Egyptian goddess. They composed sonnets to the most beautiful woman in all the world. Though few ever discovered her identity, she was Sophia, the Virgin of Wisdom, whom all the philosophers of the world have wooed. Isis represents the mystery of motherhood, which the ancients recognized as the most apparent proof of nature's omniscient wisdom and God's overshadowing power. To the modern seeker, she is the epitome of the great unknown, and only those who unveil her will be able to solve the mysteries of life, death, generation, and regeneration. Mummification of the Egyptian dead. Servius, commenting on Virgil's Aeneid, observes that the wise Egyptians took care to embalm their bodies and deposit them in catacombs, in order that the soul might be preserved for a long time in connection with the body, and might not soon be alienated, while the Romans, with an opposite design, committed the remains of their dead to the funeral pile, intending that the vital spark might immediately be restored to the general element or return to its pristine nature. From Pritchard's An Analysis of the Egyptian Mythology. No complete records are available which give the secret doctrine of the Egyptians concerning the relationship existing between the spirit, or consciousness, and the body which it inhabited. It is reasonably certain, however, that Pythagoras, who had been initiated in the Egyptian temples, when he promulgated the doctrine of metempsychosis, restated, in part at least, the teachings of the Egyptian initiates. The popular supposition that the Egyptians mummified their dead in order to preserve the form for a physical resurrection is untenable in the light of modern knowledge regarding their philosophy of death. In the fourth book of On Abstinence from Animal Food, Porphyry describes an Egyptian custom of purifying the dead by removing the contents of the abdominal cavity, which they placed in a separate chest. He then reproduces the following oration, which had been translated out of the Egyptian tongue by Euphantus. O sovereign Son, and all ye gods who impart life to men, receive me, and deliver me to the eternal gods as a cohabitant, for I have always piously worshipped those divinities which were pointed out to me by my parents as long as I lived in this age, and have likewise always honored those who procreated my body. And with respect to other men, I have never slain anyone, nor defrauded any one of what he deposited with me, nor have I committed any other atrocious deed. If, therefore, during my life I have acted erroneously by eating or drinking things which it is unlawful to eat or drink, I have not erred through myself, but through these, pointing to the chest which contained the viscera. The removal of the organs identified as the seat of appetites was considered equivalent to the purification of the body from their evil influences. Osiris, king of the underworld. Osiris is often represented with the lower part of his body enclosed in a mummy case or wrapped about with funeral bandages. Man's spirit consists of three distinct parts, only one of which incarnates in physical form. The human body was considered to be a tomb or sepulchre of this incarnating spirit. Therefore, Osiris, a symbol of the incarnating ego, was represented with the lower half of his body mummified, to indicate that he was the living spirit of man enclosed within the material form symbolized by the mummy case. There is a romance between the active principle of God and the passive principle of nature. From the union of these two principles is produced the rational creation. Man is a composite creature. From this Father, the active principle, he inherits his divine spirit, the fire of aspiration, that immortal part of himself which rises triumphant from the broken clay of mortality, that part which remains after the natural organisms have disintegrated or have been regenerated. From his mother, the passive principle, he inherits his body, that part over which the laws of nature have control, his humanity, his mortal personality, his appetites, his feelings, and his emotions. The Egyptians also believed that Osiris was the river Nile, and that Isis, his sister wife, was the contiguous land, which, when inundated by the river, bore fruit and harvest. The murky water of the Nile were believed to account for the blackness of Osiris, who was generally symbolized as being of ebony hue. So, literally did the early Christians interpret their scriptures, that they preserved the bodies of their dead by pickling them in salt water, so that on the day of resurrection the spirit of the dead might re-enter a complete and perfectly preserved body. Believing that the incisions necessary to the embalming process and the removal of the internal organs would prevent the return of the spirit to its body, the Christians buried their dead without resorting to the more elaborate mummification methods employed by the Egyptian morticians. In his work on Egyptian magic, SSDD hazards the following speculation concerning the esoteric purposes behind the practice of mummification. There is every reason to suppose, he says, that only those who had received some grade of initiation were mummified, for it is certain that, in the eyes of the Egyptians, mummification effectually prevented reincarnation. Reincarnation was necessary to imperfect souls, to those who had failed to pass the tests of initiation, but for those who had the will and capacity to enter the secret adytum, there was seldom necessity for that liberation of the soul which is said to be effected by the destruction of the body. The body of the initiate was therefore preserved after death as a species of talisman or material basis for the manifestation of the soul upon earth. During the period of its inception, mummification was limited to the pharaoh and such other persons of royal rank as presumably partook of the attributes of the great Osiris, the divine, mummified king of the Egyptian underworld. The sun, a universal deity. The adoration of the sun was one of the earliest and most natural forms of religious expression. Complex modern theologies are merely involvements and amplifications of this simple aboriginal belief. The primitive mind, recognizing the beneficent power of the solar orb, adored it as the proxy of the supreme deity. Concerning the origin of sun worship, Albert Pike makes the following concise statement in his Morals and Dogma. To them, aboriginal peoples, he, the sun, was the innate fire of bodies, the fire of nature. Author of life, heat, and ignition, he was to them the efficient cause of all generation. For without him there was no movement, no existence, no form. He was to them immense, indivisible, imperishable, and everywhere present. It was their need of light and of his creative energy that was felt by all men, and nothing was more fearful to them than his absence. His beneficent influences caused his identification with the principle of good, and the Brahma of the Hindus, and Mithras of the Persians, and Atum, Amun, Ptah, and Osiris of the Egyptians, the Bel of the Chaldeans, the Adonai of the Phoenicians, the Adonis and Apollo of the Greeks, became but personifications of the sun, the regenerating principle image of that fecundity which perpetuates and rejuvenates the world's existence. Among all the nations of antiquity, altars, mounds, and temples were dedicated to the worship of the orb of day. The ruins of these sacred places yet remain, notable among them being the pyramids of Yucatan and Egypt, the snake mounds of the American Indians, the ziggurats of Babylon and Chaldea, the round towers of Ireland, and the massive rings of uncut stone in Britain and Normandy. The Tower of Babel, which, according to the scriptures, was built so that man might reach up to God, was probably an astronomical observatory. Many early priests and prophets, both pagan and Christian, were versed in astronomy and astrology. Their writings are best understood when read in the light of these ancient sciences. With the growth of man's knowledge and the constitution and periodicity of the heavenly bodies, astronomical principles and terminology were introduced into his religious systems. The tutelary gods were given planetary thrones, the celestial bodies being named after the deities assigned to them. The fixed stars were divided into constellations, and through these constellations wandered the sun and its planets, the latter with their accompanying satellites. The Solar Trinity. The sun, as supreme among the celestial bodies visible to the astronomers of antiquity, was assigned the highest of the gods and became symbolic of the supreme authority of the Creator himself. From a deep philosophic consideration of the powers and principles of the sun has come the concept of the Trinity as it is understood in the world today. The tenet of a triune divinity is not peculiar to Christian or Mosaic theology, but forms a conspicuous part of the dogma of the greatest religions of both ancient and modern times. The Persians, Hindus, Babylonians, and Egyptians had their trinities. In every instance, these represented the threefold form of one supreme intelligence. In modern Masonry, the deity is symbolized by an equilateral triangle, its three sides representing the primary manifestations of the Eternal One, who is himself represented as a tiny flame, called by the Hebrews Yod. Yaakov Boehme, the Teutonic mystic, calls the Trinity the three witnesses, by means of which the invisible is made known to the visible, tangible universe. The Lion of the Sun, from Maurice's Indian Antiquities. The sun rising over the back of the lion, or, astrologically, in the back of the lion, has always been considered symbolic of power and rulership. A symbol very similar to the one above appears on the flag of Persia, whose people have always been sun worshippers. Kings and emperors have frequently associated their terrestrial power with the celestial power of the solar orb, and have accepted the sun, or one of its symbolic beasts or birds, as their emblem. Witness the lion of the great Mogul and the eagles of Caesar and Napoleon. The origin of the Trinity is obvious to anyone who will observe the daily manifestations of the sun. This orb, being the symbol of all light, has three distinct phases: rising, midday, and setting. The philosophers therefore divided the life of all things into three distinct parts: growth, maturity, and decay. Between the twilight of dawn and the twilight of evening is the high noon of resplendent glory. God the Father, the Creator of the world, is symbolized by the dawn. His color is blue, because the sun rising in the morning is veiled in blue mist. God the Son, the illuminating one, sent to bear witness of his Father before all the worlds, is the celestial globe at noonday, radiant and magnificent, the maned Lion of Judah, the golden-haired Savior of the world. Yellow is his color, and his power is without end. God, the Holy Ghost, is the sunset phase, when the orb of day, robed in flaming red, rests for a moment upon the horizon line and then vanishes into the darkness of the night, wandering the lower worlds, and later rise again triumphant from the embrace of darkness. To the Egyptians, the sun was the symbol of immortality, for while it died each night, it rose again with each ensuing dawn. Not only has the sun this diurnal activity, but it also has its annual pilgrimage, during which time it passes successively through the 12 celestial houses of the heavens, remaining in each for 30 days. Added to these, it has a third path of travel, which is called the precession of the equinoxes, in which it retrogrades around the zodiac through the 12 signs at the rate of 1 degree every 72 years. Concerning the annual passage of the sun through the 12 houses of the heavens, Robert Hewitt Brown, 32nd degree, makes the following statement. The sun, as he pursued his way among these living creatures of the zodiac, was said, in allegorical language, either to assume the nature of or to triumph over the sign he entered. The sun thus became a bull in Taurus, and was worshipped as such by the Egyptians under the name of Apis, and by the Assyrians as Bel, Baal, or Bull. In Leo, the sun became a lion slayer, Hercules, and an archer in Sagittarius. In Pisces, the fishes, he was a fish, Dagon, or Vishnu, the fish god of the Philistines and Hindus. A careful analysis of the religious systems of pagandom uncovers much evidence of the fact that its priests served the solar energy and that their supreme deity was in every case this divine light personified. Godfrey Higgins, after 30 years of inquiry into the origin of religious beliefs, is of the opinion that all the gods of antiquity resolved themselves into the solar fire, sometimes itself as God, or sometimes as an emblem or Shekinah of that higher principle known by the name of the creative being or God. The Egyptian priests in many of their ceremonies wore the skins of lions, which were symbols of the solar orb, owing to the fact that the sun is exalted, dignified, and most fortunately placed in the constellation of Leo, which he rules and which was at one time the keystone of the celestial arch. Again, Hercules is the solar deity, for as this mighty hunter performed his 12 labors, so the sun, in traversing the 12 houses of the zodiacal band, performs during his pilgrimage 12 essential and benevolent labors for the human race and for nature in general. Hercules, like the Egyptian priests, wore the skin of a lion for a girdle. Samson, the Hebrew hero, as his name implies, is also a solar deity. His fight with the Nubian lion, his battles with the Philistines, who represent the powers of darkness, and his memorable feat of carrying off the gates of Gaza, all refer to aspects of solar activity. Many of the ancient peoples had more than one solar deity. In fact, all of the gods and goddesses were supposed to partake, in part at least, of the sun's effulgence. The Winged Globe of Egypt, from Maurice's Indian Antiquities. This symbol, which appears over the pylons or gates of many Egyptian palaces and temples, is emblematic of the three persons of the Egyptian Trinity. The wings, the serpent, and the solar orb are the insignia of Amun, Ra, and Osiris. The golden ornaments used by the priestcraft of the various world religions are again a subtle reference to the solar energy, as are also the crowns of kings. In ancient times, crowns had a number of points extending outward like the rays of the sun, but modern conventionalism has, in many cases, either removed the points or else bent them inward, gathered them together, and placed an orb or cross upon the point where they meet. Many of the ancient prophets, philosophers, and dignitaries carried a scepter, the upper end of which bore a representation of the solar globe, surrounded by emanating rays. All the kingdoms of earth were but copies of the kingdoms of heaven, and the kingdoms of heaven were best symbolized by the solar kingdom, in which the sun was the supreme ruler, the planets his privy council, and all nature the subjects of his empire. Many deities have been associated with the sun. The Greeks believed that Apollo, Bacchus, Dionysus, Sabazius, Hercules, Jason, Ulysses, Zeus, Uranus, and Vulcan partook of either the visible or invisible attributes of the sun. The Norwegians regarded Balder the Beautiful as a solar deity, and Odin is often connected with the celestial orb, especially because of his one eye. Among the Egyptians, Osiris, Ra, Anubis, Hermes, and even the mysterious Ammon himself had points of resemblance with the solar disk. Isis was the mother of the sun, and even Typhon, the destroyer, was supposed to be a form of solar energy. The Egyptian sun myth finally centered around the person of a mysterious deity called Serapis. The two Central American deities, Tezcatlipoca and Quetzalcoatl, while often associated with the winds, were also undoubtedly solar gods. In Masonry, the sun has many symbols. One expression of the solar energy is Solomon, whose name, Sol, On, is the name for the supreme light in 3 different languages. Hiram Abif, the Hiram of the Chaldees, is also a solar deity, and the story of his attack and murder by the ruffians, with its solar interpretation, will be found in the chapter The Hiramic Legend. A striking example of the important part which the sun plays in the symbols and rituals of Freemasonry is given by George Oliver, D.D., in his Dictionary of Symbolical Masonry as follows. The sun rises in the east, and in the east is the place for the worshipful master. As the sun is the source of all light and warmth, so should the worshipful master enliven and warm the brethren to their work. Among the ancient Egyptians, the sun was the symbol of divine providence. The hierophants of the mysteries were adorned with many insignia emblematic of solar power. The sunbursts of gilt embroidery on the back of the vestments of the Catholic priesthood signify that the priest is also an emissary and representative of Sol Invictus. Christianity and the Sun.